across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome to the show. This is Alex Phillips covering Drive again for Jeremy Kyle, who is cooling his heels after a very hard day at the golf course. Wonderful man that he is. He was doing it all for charity, apparently. I am here with you through until 7 o'clock this evening, and I can't wait because there's a lot to enjoy, especially the humiliation of our Prime Minister, who at one point in time called the whole Rwanda plan a gimmick. What would we be doing as a civilized nation if we were sending poor, hard done by illegal migrants to another country for processing? And then what happened is he decided that actually this might have been a good idea. And perhaps we need to speak to someone else, given that America is sniffing around all of the infrastructure that we paid to be built in Rwanda for this exact purpose, the gimmick that he called it out to be. Although, was it a gimmick? Well, he seemed to think that he had a better deal, in fact, with Albania. That was until the president of Albania himself turned around and said, nope, we really do not have any sort of deal with you. We got a deal with Italy, that's fine. That's because of geographical location. That's because of the close relationship between our countries. But you, my friends, are back of the queue. So apparently now he is looking at other countries. The difference is, though, I'm going to explain this before we dive into it wholly. The difference is this. What Boris Johnson was proposing with the Rwanda plan was anyone who came into Britain illegally would be sent to Rwanda for processing. And then this magical word refoulement came into play, which meant that somehow under some sort of tract of law, some passage of legislation written under an international treaty, Lord knows when it was, that you couldn't be sent to a third country from whence they might then send you somewhere else, and that is refoulement. With Albania, apparently it's when people had their applications denied that they would then be sent to Albania to either be sent home or to, I don't know, work in Albania. That is the slight difference in all of it. But what is clear is that when he binned off the Rwanda plan, saying it was just a gimmick, and it was potentially starting to have some sort of effect, arguably, as a deterrent, there wasn't really anything to take its place. And since then, he said he's going to smash the gangs. Well, OK then, Inspector Clouseau, how are you doing with that? How's it going there, Mr. Interpol incarnate? How many gangs have you indeed smashed? Doesn't seem to be very many. And so there he is with egg on his face. Now, to delve into that even further, let's talk to Henry Hill, who is a political commentator. Henry, how are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, my darling. Let's talk about Albania. Let's kick us off with this. Now, there is a difference, isn't there, between the Albania plan, as posited by Sir Keir Starmer, albeit seemingly jumping the gun somewhat, and the Rwanda plan. But to any sort of casual observer, it really just looks like he's a hypocrite who is caught short.
Yeah, I mean, the government is basically flailing around trying to do the impossible, which is resolve public anger about illegal immigration without accepting that the current legal architecture to which Britain is signed up makes that functionally impossible. You're completely right. There are some important differences between these two schemes. This one, as you say, if it ever happens, is about people who have had their claims rejected here. The other one was it actually you would have gone to Rwanda straight away, regardless, and we would have processed your claim there, and then if you were successful, you would have got asylum in Rwanda. So the whole point was it was trying to deter people from even trying their luck, whereas this is much more about avoiding the problem we have with people who we've rejected their claim. We can't return them to their own country because that country is being obstructive, or they've destroyed their paperwork. They end up plugging up hotels, or they abscond and they start working in the black economy. But for any government to tee up a deal like this and then have the other government simply say that actually this deal doesn't exist, it's an extraordinary diplomatic blunder.
And am I wrong in thinking that actually the Trump administration is now eyeing up Rwanda as the potential silver bullet for their migration problems?
I mean, it might be. That certainly seems to be some of the chatter, and it does make a lot of sense. If you're the United States, you can presumably you've got a lot more clout. You presumably won't be run around the roses quite as much as the British government was by the Kagame regime. And there is potential there. For example, if you dramatically, America has obviously much larger budgets than we do, dramatically expanded those facilities. And of course, the whole point, one of the best arguments ever made for Rwanda to me, it was never made by a politician, but I got it from some Home Office sources, is that one of the biggest problems, as I just alluded to, is that if someone is coming here, their obvious incentive is to throw their passport overboard when they're in the channel. Because that means once they get here, there's lots of countries that will take people back if we can prove that they're a citizen of that country. But if we don't have the paperwork, then they won't. And so then those people end up essentially undeportable by dint of having got rid of their passport. The advantage of Rwanda is that because the process was entirely automatic, you'd be sent to Rwanda anyway. And then if you didn't want to end up staying in Rwanda, well, you'd probably need a passport to be able to leave that country. So it was about incentivizing people to hold on to their paperwork so that if they were rejected, we could deport them more easily as well. And you can see why that would appeal to the Trump administration with all of the problems it has on the southern border.
But given how, I mean, the difference, of course, between the Trump administration and our administration is the executive orders can come from the president. They have their Supreme Court, which is now weighted in favour of the Republican Party, some might argue, in terms of numerically speaking. The difference is, of course, in this country with our system, that over and above the Prime Minister is the Supreme Court, and over and above the Supreme Court is the ECHR. And so criticisms that Rwanda might have been gimmick politics could be founded on the basis that at the end of the day, what stopped those flights from taking off were all of the legal challenges that the government couldn't do anything about.
But you see, that's actually, this is a really interesting and important point to tease out. That's not how our constitution works. The parliament is at the apex of our constitution, right? Parliament can, in our constitution, pass any law it likes. It can, as did Tony Blair, ignore the ECHR. When the ECHR said that we had to give votes to prisoners, Tony Blair, the passer of the Human Rights Act, simply said, nope, we're not going to do that. Parliament can pass laws which explicitly set aside ECHR provisions or Supreme Court judgments. The problem has been that politicians have been unwilling to have that fight. Time and again, Rishi Sunak bent over backwards to try and come up with a version of the Rwanda scheme which did not involve changing any of our treaties or doing any kind of legal opt-outs from the various laws to which we're currently signed up. That was his big mistake. I suspect it will be Starmer's big mistake. But in this country, it is actually much easier to get stuff done in Britain than it is in America. In America, you need to have the presidency, you need to have both houses of Congress, and then there's the question of who's appointed what judges where at what time. In this country, if you have a big majority in the House of Commons, which Sir Keir Starmer does, you can do whatever you want. And if you're not doing it, it's because on some level you're choosing not to do it.
Well, let's look at that, because actually in the Labour Party's white paper on immigration, there's suggestions of actually rebuilding parliamentary sovereignty and ignoring, as Blair does, elements of the ECHR and court rulings that have been obstructive to deportations. Are you suggesting to me actually that that white paper may indeed have some metal to it, and that if the Labour Party managed to coerce their backbenchers into going along with this, we could actually begin to see Parliament saying, no, he will be deported or she will be deported, and we have the final word on this?
It will be very interesting to see whether or not backbench Labour MPs are prepared to go along with it, because, of course, they're already very unhappy at Sir Keir Starmer for all kinds of reasons. But it is interesting historically that while Labour do tend in the modern age to be the party that signs us up to this kind of thing, you know, they love quangos, they love international courts and all the rest of it, they do also tend to be the party that's much less sentimental about ignoring them compared to us. You know, think back to the big row over the winter fuel payment. Rachel Reeves just simply didn't do an impact assessment under the Equality Act. And there were lots of Conservatives being like, oh, but she hasn't done this. And it's like, you guys could have ignored some of this stuff too, but the Conservatives tend to complain about it a lot, but then obey it all. Whereas Labour, perhaps because it was the party that introduced it, tends to be much better at overruling it. Now, it depends a lot on what the actual substance of this paper is, and there's a big chance that Starmer is making the same mistake that every British politician has made on immigration for as long as I can remember, which is talking really well and then under-delivering and wondering why the public get mad at him. But it is absolutely the case that if Parliament decided to pass a law, for example, saying that anyone here illegally convicted of sexual offences, for example, does not get to make a ECHR appeal against deportation, it could pass that law next year, tomorrow, and that law would stand. And it would not and the Supreme Court or the ECHR would not be able to overturn it.
Now, talking about those who have convicted sex offences and reverting our attention back to the domestic population as opposed to foreigners, apparently sexual offenders could be among those up for early release from prisons because our male prisons especially are full to capacity. How should we ingest information such as that?
It's the product of an endemic long-term failure to build enough prisons. In fact, I think under the previous 14 years of Conservative government, I don't remember the exact figures off the top of my head, but the Conservatives closed a double-digit number of prisons, and they didn't open nearly so many. There are currently 4 former prisons, I believe, which, because they can't get planning permission to be turned into anything else, are either derelict or, this is the best one, tourist attractions as prisons.
What?
So you can go and walk around. You genuinely, a couple of them, look them up. You can go around and you as a tourist can go and see what it would be like to be in a prison, which 5 years ago was a working prison.
What?
And they've done nothing to change it. I think Judge Jules played a rave in one last month. It's absolutely extraordinary. I know. Every time I say this is the response that I get. But, you know, HMP Lancaster, in Lancaster Castle, I believe that's a prison. There's a couple of other, a tourist attraction now. There's at least a couple of other ones, right? And what the problem is, we need much more prison capacity, and we have needed more prison capacity for a long time.
This is all brand new information to me. Now, normally I think I'm a well-read journalist who's done her digging into certain topics. I didn't know that the Conservatives had closed a load of prisons, which are now having raves taking place inside them. What on earth were they thinking when they did that? Is that because they said we don't have enough resources, the budget doesn't afford it, we don't have the staff to man these prisons? Or what on earth were they playing at, closing prisons when we understand that the prison estate is full to bursting?
So there will be different cases for different prisons. I believe that some of it will have been, driven by the austerity program in the 2010s. Some of it will have been the modernization program. There's a long-standing criticism of the fact that we are still using a lot of Victorian prisons, which don't really come up to modern standards. Now, of course, I'm sure you and I both agree, if we can replace a Victorian prison with another prison that's better, absolutely wonderful. But we think what ended up happening is we shut some of the Victorian ones and then didn't open new ones. The most egregious one, and really, you really want to dig into this, it's going to depress you, but you really should, is HMP Lancaster. Because HMP Lancaster was modernised. It was in Lancaster Castle, which seems a bit old-fashioned, but it was modernised in about 2007 by New Labour. Ken Clarke had wanted to shut it in the 90s. He became Justice Secretary again in 2010, and he wrote in his autobiography, I finally got to shut HMP Lancaster. HMP Lancaster had the second best results for recidivism, that means people not going on to commit more crimes, in the entire country.
So what was the beef against HMP Lancaster? That it was in a castle or something, and that's not good enough for our poor darling inmates? Or
I think it was a combination of it simply seemed very old-fashioned, and the local authority wanted to turn the castle into a tourist attraction. Now, again, you can maybe see why the council would want that. Councils not wanting prisons and so on in their area is one of the reasons that we don't have nearly enough. But there are quite a lot of castles in Britain, if you want to go and visit one. I think we've probably got more per capita than most other countries outside of, I don't know, maybe France and Germany. And so the fact that we shut a perfectly good, not just a perfectly good, an excellent prison, and have turned it into, a large part of it is still a prison that you can go and look around as a paying tourist, is absolutely remarkable.
It's remarkable indeed. I kind of feel like I know where my next weekend jaunt's going to be, and it's going to see Judge Jules at HMP Lancaster. I mean, it just beggars belief. But at the same time as closing prisons, we have huge questions that need to be answered, not just on the capability of the prison officers. And I think about an explosion in cases of female prison guards having illicit relationships with inmates. And I kind of think, what's going on here? Why is Little Miss OnlyFans there in an all-male prison prison in charge of the locks and the keys seems mad. But also for all those prison officers who put themselves in the line of danger, have a thankless task. They go to work day in, day out on the front line of dealing with some of the most dangerous, violent people that this country knows, and yet they're given absolutely no protection. They're not armed in any way, shape or form. Most of them are patrolling the balconies in just a short-sleeved shirt and a pair of trousers. And once again, we have found another example of a prison officer being attacked, this time a throat slash. Thankfully, the wounds were largely superficial. It needed treatment in hospital, but nothing fatal. But this follows on from, of course, most high-profile, arguably, prisoner in the land, Axel Rudabakana, chucking boiling water over prison officers. And then before that, the brother of the Manchester arena bombings, having access to hot oil. And you have to ask yourself, why is it that in most other lines of work, health and safety comes first? Keir Starmer can't even do a press conference from some sort of annex room at Jaguar Land Rover without dressing up as Fireman Sam, right, in case some sort of machinery suddenly goes full Bertha mode and tries to attack him. And yet we've got prison officers who don't have anything to defend themselves while they are trying to manage and control a population of inmates who, quite frankly, to the average person, are pretty damn scary.
I mean, that's especially true now because one factor, we've just talked about our prisons being horribly overcrowded, but that is still the case that because they're overcrowded, the judges are sending fewer people to prison relatively to the number of people coming through the courts. So the prison population is sort of self-selecting to be scarier and scarier. It's a combination really of a few factors. One of the big ones is that, again, during the austerity period under George Osborne, the decision was made that they were just going to slash the prisons budget. And the way they did that was they bought out early retirement for most of our most experienced officers, right? So the people who'd been on the wards or whatever they're called for 20 years, they got paid off to go and leave. And then a few years later, the government realised what a catastrophic mistake this was and that the prisons were now horribly short-handed and started trying to recruit, but it couldn't get those really experienced people back. And so you had a huge loss of institutional knowledge. There's then, as you say, underspending. But also, it's a real problem. There's a sort of battle with prison reformers who basically really hate the idea of having, quote unquote, militarized American-style prisons. They don't like the idea of guards walking the corridors armed. It creates a bad environment for the prisoners. And in a low security prison, absolutely. I don't want to see, snipers in watch posts outside a category D where someone's in there for fraud or whatever. But in some of our most dangerous prisons, this is creating, on top of staff imbalances and everything else, a huge imbalance of power between the people who are supposed to be running that prison and the people who are supposed to be sort of serving their time in it. And it not only leads to attacks, but because these staff are worried about attacks, it means that those prisons stay in lockdown for much longer as part of the day than they used to, and that's bad for you and me because I'm happy to send people to prison, but if we're sending people to prison, I'd ideally like them to be rehabilitated, and you are not going to rehabilitate someone by keeping them locked in their cell 23 hours a day. But if you don't have enough, they don't like being called guards, if you don't have enough prison officers to properly supervise activities, teaching and lessons and so on, what happens in a lot of our prisons is prisoners end up rotting behind closed doors. And sometimes, even in the most dangerous ones, very dangerous men are given access to boiling water, boiling oil, rather than upset them or their lawyers.
Potentially more alarmingly is they're given access to one another. When you hear about the gang lawfare that's taking over prisons, whether it's drugs kingpins flying in illicit items via drone, and potentially prison officers might be part of this, potentially not, but using leverage in the real world against families, relatives, friends, accomplices. And then, of course, the Islamist terrorism we're seeing inside prisons. It beggars belief. Apparently, someone's just messaged saying Shrewsbury Jail is a tourist attraction. I don't know if that is true. Yeah, great show. Someone says Lancaster Castle Prison is now a tour centre. You can go on a guided tour. Adults £2.50, children £1.50. Baz in Wigan. I can't believe what I'm reading. The Rwanda scheme was working as a deterrent, someone says. The freeloaders were just waiting for Starmer to get in. Then he threw his toys out the pram, scrapped it, and the boats have not stopped. And then this one, I want to speak to you about this. Colin from County Durham. Starmer's new plan to release criminals early. If they're released, then they reoffend. they go back for 28 days. But what about the new offence they've just committed? Does that mean you get that for free, or does it get added on or count against the original offence? I mean, this scheme of, well, you know, we've got to release people early because we've got no capacity anymore, and if you breach the sort of parameters of your release of your bail, whatever it's called, you're going to be summoned back for another month. I mean, what does that mean? Is that an extra tariff? I don't understand the workings of this plan, and it doesn't seem like much of a deterrent.
So I'd have to look at the detail. If you break your parole terms, say, for example, you're told to stay within a certain area or to stay away from a certain area or certain person, especially important in things like domestic violence cases and so on, then that you simply you lose your early release and you go back and serve your original sentence. If you go and commit another criminal offence, I don't think that can simply be added to your tariff, and you certainly can't simply be given it for free. But of course, you'd have to have a new trial. And there are years of backlogs in the court system at the moment. So what happens is the police open that case up, they process it, they pass it over to the CPS, the gears of justice start turning very, very slowly, and maybe in a few years' time you'll be back in the dock looking at another sentence. So that's how I believe that works.
And do you think that there's anything in this immigration white paper that the Labour government can put into effect before they come to the end of their first term, perhaps their only term, that will actually persuade people that they've got a handle on, be it law and order or immigration?
In theory, yes, they have time. It's not like, you know, housing policy, for example. The challenge with that is that I think they missed the boat with the King's Speech, just because there's so much lead time in you need developers to respond to incentives. You then need to get spades in the ground, physically build the things. Immigration policy can change a lot more quickly. If the government passed a law, which it can do in a single sort of parliament, one-year parliament, saying, right, we're going to strip away appeals from X, Y, and Z cases, that comes into effect immediately, right? And if they maybe made that, say, retroactive from the day the law was announced, that means that it could actually apply to a lot of cases that are currently underway and so on. So yes, in theory, if this government was prepared to grasp the horns of the immigration bull, it could have delivered quite substantial change by 2029, which is when the next election has to be. The question, of course, is whether or not Sir Keir Starmer will have the guts to do it once these measures become not just abstract talk, but real concrete proposals, and Lord Hermer and all of his international human rights lawyer friends and professional colleagues start screaming their heads off.
Yeah, well, do you know what? I'm not going to give away which way I vote. I think most people know. But one actually wishes any government of the United Kingdom to get a grasp on these issues. So important are they to the cohesion of our society. Henry, thank you ever so much for coming on the programme and talking through all of those political stories with us at the top of the hour. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but remember that Supreme Court ruling? Remember when Frankenstein's Castle, the Tavistock Clinic, was closed down because it was all too ghoulish and we shouldn't be giving kids puberty blockers and deranging young minds, let alone encouraging the mutilation of their bodies? And we thought perhaps common sense had finally come into play and we were stopping what, to me, was an industrial state-sanctioned level of child abuse. Well, no, apparently not, because trans toddlers, little ones, kiddies, toddlers, are going to be allowed gender treatment on the NHS. What is going on? We're going to be asking that after this. not in a million years, even if I really exercise myself, even if I really try and understand what is divisive about Island of Strangers, I can't find anything in it. We're an island, yes, and if people don't know each other because they're not saying hello to each other on the street, they're strangers. What is so divisive about saying Island of Strangers?
I just think it's unnecessary and it's a bit exclusionary.
It's
and
not.
It's a bit
It's
words.
words.
And I think it's no, but words matter and language matters in politics. It does.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. Well, egg on his face, some might say, after the Albanian PM has dashed the UK's hopes of processing failed migrants abroad, because he turned around and said, well, that's all very well, that's nice, you want to use Albania. Yes, we've got an agreement with Italy, but, well, that is a pact with Italy, not with you, my friend. Meanwhile, what we are finding is that Overton window is shifted, continues to shift at a hurtling speed, faster than icebergs are melting in the Arctic, some might say. And it turns out now that a migration freeze, if not even net negative migration, is backed by nearly half of all voters. Well, let's get the political angle on this. What can Starmer achieve? How much opposition is there within his own ranks? And can he actually get the job done? We're going to be speaking in just a moment to the deputy political editor of The Sun. Before we go and speak to Ryan, who has all of the intel and the information from the corridors of power, what do you think about this? I mean, were you someone like me who also thought that the Rwanda plan was never going to take off literally and figuratively, because there would be far too many entities, from lefty lawyers to charities to the ECHR to the Supreme Court to even High Court judges, who would find a way to make sure that there was no one on a plane, even if it did take off, and then probably some sort of short-fringed weirdo gluing themselves to the tarmac the minute it starts taxiing down the runway. Or do you think that actually, if only the Conservative Party had kept their nerve, didn't play the sort of pantomime musical chairs game of changing leader every 5 minutes, used Boris Johnson's massive 80-seat majority to push things through? As Henry Hill was saying, actually, there's a lot of power in the UK Parliament as long as you've got a big enough majority and hold your nerve. Perhaps you think that, you know, this could have worked, and that Sir Keir Starmer's, we're going to smash the gangs, we're not going to be sending people abroad for processing, that is inhumane, that's immoral, that can't be done, actually we are going to do it for Albania, or apparently not Albania, let's speak to Macedonia instead. I mean, it's just like bailing out a sinking ship, isn't it? What do you make of all of this? Can any government actually get on top of what should be a very easy policy of defending our borders and deciding who lives here, the basic premise of being a nation state? Let me know your thoughts. 03444991000 is the number to call, and I would love to speak to you in person, so dial that number and register your interest at having a chit chat at any point during the programme, and then when the time is good and ripe, we will give you a call back. You can also use that number to send me a WhatsApp message, or indeed leave me a voice note on WhatsApp, which I can play out to the nation. If you'd rather send me a text message, it's 87222. If you do that, you've got to write talk before your text. That way it ping-pongs around the stratosphere and all the space gubbins, the alien crafts, the orbs, the Starlinks, and finds its way to the masts on top of Talk Towers and into the studio. We're on X at talkTV. So keep your thoughts and feelings and opinions coming in, because this show is as much about you as it is me. We are all about communal catharsis. Now, as promised, let's speak to Ryan Saby, Deputy Political political editor of The Sun, to get the politics angle on all of this. Ryan, great to have you on the programme. First of all, let's start off with this. Well, I don't think it's a startling poll at all. There's nothing about what's written in the Telegraph today that half of all voters actually back a migration freeze. That surprises me. I would imagine that if drilled down even further, a great many might actually want net negative immigration. This is the political landscape within which the Labour Party are having to operate. But do they have the gumption and the strategies to deliver? We've seen that white paper. We've seen in some cases a sort of built out, more nuts and bolts idea of how they're going to achieve certain things. In other elements, I would say more sort of mood music. We want integration. OK, by what particular mechanism? Can you see this Labour Party, with its majority in the Parliament, of actually being able to deliver meaningful change on migration?
I think the trouble with legal migration is try to bring down the numbers. They want to bring down the numbers, but if you actually look at the nuts and bolts of the immigration white paper that came out earlier this week, that actually you look into the detail of it, they're only going to try and they only can achieve a reduction of 100,000 per year. Now look at the sort of numbers we're at the moment. Up until June 2023, net migration was around 900,000, and we compare that to David Cameron, and he wanted to bring it down to the tens of thousands. With Boris Johnson, it was around 300,000. So there is still a really long way to go with all of this. But as you say, Keir Starmer set out his stall on Monday. Let's just see where he gets with it. But those numbers are big, and he's going to be judged on two things when it comes to the next election: the immigration and the economy, and he has to succeed on both.
I mean, what's fascinating by the whole debate about immigration, to me and most people out there, you would think if a country cannot control its borders and say, we're not going to let you in, you've broken the law, you've thrown away your passport, you're undocumented, you're trying to bust on into our islands without any permission, that should be the first port of call for something that defines itself as a nation state, the defence and identification of its frontiers. And yet, for some reason, this keeps managing to evade successive governments. Are we supposed to believe as voters or, audience to this programme, that actually no government can do anything at all, that this is just inevitable and that everybody has their hands tied behind their back? Or is this a question of political will?
I think it comes down to political will, but it's also the practicalities of open borders, whether it comes to legal migration and crackdown on legal routes, visas, etc., or the sort of the pictures and the imagery that we see when it comes to illegal migration. When you have tens of thousands of people coming over every single year, it just doesn't look good. And I think the other trouble for Sir Keir Starmer, I think politics comes down to authenticity. Look what he was saying 3 or 4 years ago. It certainly wasn't that really, really tough language that he came out with this week. Would we have seen him saying phrases such as an island, Britain is an island of strangers? That certainly wouldn't have been in any sort of election pitch to the Labour leadership, and it certainly wouldn't have something that he just said 2 or 3 years ago. But he's been forced into this phraseology, mainly because he's got Nigel Farage on his shoulder. Every single way he looks, he sees that the Labour support is bleeding to reform, and he's only got one way to turn. He has to try and out Farage, but that is tough because there's only one Nigel Farage.
There is only one Nigel Farage, indeed. But, walk me through this whole kerfuffle over the words island of strangers. Because, OK, so you've got people saying, well, it sounds a bit like the Rivers of Blood speech. Look, I don't know that speech verbatim. Nobody really does. It happened about 50-odd years ago. And when you do sort of look at the comparison between the two, well, the word strangers is used in both. But to me, otherwise, it's a fleeting sort of moment of similarity. And yet it seems to me that all of this debate over, divisive rhetoric, divisive language, I can't see what is so upsetting about saying we've become an island of strangers at all, personally. And I really stretch myself sometimes to try and pretend to be a lefty and understand the synthetic offence. And this one, I think, is really clutching at straws. But it does smack to me, particularly as people like Khan himself has turned around and said, I don't like this language, it is divisive, that there could be the glimmer of a backbench rebellion against the Prime Minister. What are you hearing in the corridors of power?
When it comes to a certain group of Labour MPs, whether it's the left of the party or even some that are moving towards the centre of the Labour Party, there is real sort of an anger at some of the language that he was using. But if you switch over to the sort of target voters that Sir Keir Starmer is actually looking towards, it's fitting perfectly. This is the audience that he wants to talk to. And the polling back this week shows that there is overwhelming support for the type of language he used in that speech, the island of strangers. It's exactly what they want to hear. It may sit uncomfortably in a natural way with Sir Keir, but those people around him in Downing Street, his top advisors, the likes of Morgan McSweeney, would have said, this is the kind of thing you need to say. Sir Keir Starmer says that he totally believes in it, but it's a sharp difference from what he was saying just a few years ago.
I mean, Number 10 has repudiated there being any deliberate sort of, reference to Enoch Powell's speech from 4 decades previous. But do you think there was from someone like Morgan McSweeney? I've heard that nothing gets done unless he's sort of given it the rubber stamp of approval. Do you think there might be a world in which he had said, well, look, actually, if we sort of give a nod to a dog whistle to references to that speech and there's a noise about it and there's some sort of backlash or rebellion, actually this will work to give the Prime Minister some sort of kudos when it comes to voters believing that he is serious on immigration, if he's prepared to make these sorts of these ripples?
Yeah, no, what I think that Sir Keir really needs to do is talk the language of the people who he's trying to attract. Now, if he's trying to do that, he's done a pretty good job this week. Just as I said, just look at the polling, just look at the figures of the people who he's trying to attract to him. So I think he will see this week as having had a really, really good week. And then you look at the trouble is you look at the flip side of that. He's tried to tackle this illegal migration issue. Today out in Albania, talking about a returns agreement, trying to find some kind of deterrent. But the trouble is, he was left red-faced up on the stage there with the Albanian Prime Minister. There was talk overnight of return hubs, but actually it was the Albanian Prime Minister who stood there and actually said this is just not going to happen. So I think it's back to the drawing board for Sir Keir, Number 10, and the rest of government.
Why did the wheels fall off the Albania thing? Because this isn't the first time we've heard the Labour government moot the idea of using Albania as a returns hub. This has been in the press on and off for 6 months plus. So what's gone on to cause Albania to turn around and essentially pull the rug from underneath his feet?
I think the trouble is, that there may well have been talks about having Albania as an offshoring centre, but in the harsh reality, it's really, really difficult to get these deals over the line. Look how much trouble the Rwanda policy took, and we were paying them vast sums of money. I remember writing a story about Albania, talks with Albania about 3 or 4 years ago. And that got quickly shot down once the Albanians had sort of gone through the detail, had discussed it internally, and they turned around and said, well, actually, we don't really want this to get off the ground because it just doesn't work well politically, it doesn't work well for them at home. So actually, it's back to the drawing board. It's talking to other countries, maybe in North Macedonia, the Balkans, maybe one of those countries will bite. But ultimately, it's very, very difficult to get one of these countries to sign up.
I don't know, perhaps instead of having the Eurovision Song Contest this weekend, we could have some sort of Euro prison deportation contest and see which particular lesser-known European states might be willing to help us carry that load. Ryan Saby, thank you ever so much. Fantastic catching up with you and getting the political angle straight from the heart of the Sun newspaper, the greatest publication on this earth, which is just a few floors below me now. We're going to go to a break now. When we come back, I'm going to be picking up on that story that apparently the NHS is still going to be providing gender treatment to toddlers. It's disgusting. We're going to be discussing that after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
You thought it all finished, didn't you? You thought finally the madness that we could all see taking place, the sort of warping of young people's minds to think that they're not a girl and they're not a boy, that they can be something different. And, you know, kids go through all sorts of processes of make-believe. I know I did. I used to love Cities of Gold, this cartoon on television. And one week I was Zia and the other week I was Esteban. Didn't really matter. I was allowed to be a tomboy. I was allowed to wear my brother's shell suits and scrape my knees and fall off bikes and climb trees without anybody saying to me, oh, guess what, Alex, you could also be boy Alex, not just girl Alex. And yet something's happened in the 21st century where we seem to be actively encouraging young people to not have the blue toy or the pink toy, not play with the dumper truck, but pick up a Barbie instead. And then as a result, we've got a whole load of kids who are beginning to wonder about what gender they are. And yet we thought we finally put safeguarding in place and common sense back in action when the Tavistock Clinic was closed, when the Supreme Court ruled that biological sex was the only type of sex that there is. And then we learned that the NHS are now going to be assessing children under the age of 7 for gender identity issues. Forget the CAS review, forget all the information that we've been given, forget all the clinicians and the psychiatrists and people who've said this stuff is dangerous. No, apparently we're still dancing to that tune. Well, let's speak now to Charlotte Griffiths, editor-at-large of The Mail on Sunday. Charlotte, I mean, it's all very wonky anyway, the minute people start going down the wormhole of are you a boy or are you a girl and encouraging little kids to question this. But I thought at least as a society we had realised the dangers, the perils that we faced and put checks and balances on this kind of nonsense. What has happened?
Well, I was reading this article and reading between the lines. I think what they're trying to do is get the parents who believe their kids are trans or have entertained the idea of their kids being trans into the doctor's office, because it did say that what they need to do is assess the chances that the parents or the kids might have a neurodiversity issue. And so that's why they're trying to see these kids who are under 7, because they're almost acknowledging that it is a little bit unusual to believe that a toddler can be trans. So they're trying to sort of get them in the system. So that's probably as far as I'd go to defend the idea. Mostly, I think it's obviously crazy. I don't think toddlers can be trans. I've got nothing against trans people. I've got 3 children under 6 myself. I know that they don't understand the difference between genders and sex. Yeah, they just don't. They don't actually even see skin colour, which is a wonderful thing. And my little 5-year-old the other day, I came home, she cut all her hair off, which I gather is a real rite of passage for mothers like me. And the reason was because she felt that day that she wanted to have a boy's haircut. Now, 2 days later, she was crying because she couldn't have plaits and she wanted a hairband to cover it all up. But on that day, she thought she was a boy, so she cut off all her hair. And the phase lasted 24 hours, unlike the haircut, sadly.
So what you're saying is kind of what I think, people like you and I have known from the beginning, that there is almost a sort of Hollywood genesis of middle-class trendiness of parents who suddenly think, oh, I'm going to go along with, I'm not bringing up my child as a boy or a girl. I'm so open-minded. This is wonderful. And perhaps actually this is a mechanism for safeguarding because it gives those parents some sort of outlet to have taken their kids to a clinic where they can say to their friends, I've taken my children to a gender clinic. And actually the hope is the gender clinic will say, this is growing up and that is all it is.
Exactly that. And what's so interesting is this under 7s clinic isn't in any way, drugs or anything. It's literally just talking therapy, partly to explain to the parents and reassure the parents. I don't actually even blame parents that much because they've had gender ideology forced down their necks. And a lot of parents, such as myself, perhaps unkindly, if my kid says she's going to be a boy for the day, I just sort of brush it off, and that's probably what they did in the 80s. But there would be some parents who are caring for their kids and they've had all this gender ideology pushed down them and it's everywhere and the teachers espousing it and they're thinking, oh God, if I don't recognise that my child wants to be a boy, maybe I'm a bad parent. So in a way, they do need to speak to somebody and just get that reassurance that, it's okay, kids go through phases. It's amazing we have to spell it out. Certainly, I was a child of the 80s. In the 80s, I just wasn't listened to about anything. I was told to go outside, a bit like you were, Alex, told to climb a tree and just get on with it. Mums were busy and there was less, of course, there wasn't social media, there wasn't TikTok. There was just less noise around parenting. And so parents, I think, were less anxious back in the day. Now they are a bit anxious and they need to be told, don't worry, if you can't be trans. If you're a toddler, it's probably a phase. Here's how to talk it through.
Do you think a much needed step now, and I'm pretty sure like me, you're a huge defender of free speech and liberty and the state not interfering in entertainments and broadcasting and the lot of it. But is there possibly a point that we're going to reach at some point where there has to be a conversation with producers of television programmes or publications, entertainment series, the big .com industries, where they have to be told, you've got to stop spouting this gender ideology stuff because guess what? Kids are impressionable. And guess what? Parents have enough on their hands without having to worry what sort of mad concept their kids have been exposed to. They're going to come home and say, I want to be a different gender. I think I'm this. I'm too fat. I often compare what has gone on with the trans ideology with anorexia. If a kid came home and kept saying, I'm too fat, I'm too fat, I'm too fat, I want to lose weight, that was never affirmed. You didn't have parents taking kids to doctors and go, oh, okay, then we'll fit a gastric band or we will give you Ozempic. It was, your body is absolutely fine, you're not too fat and we're going to treat this as a psychological issue. Whereas in the whole gender debate, it was constantly affirmed. You believe that and so therefore it must be true. Do we now need to be having a conversation with all of those platforms and entities that lauded, celebrated and propagated all of this stuff?
I think so, and I certainly think teachers really need to be very, very responsible when it comes to issues like this because mums chatter on the school gates, they do, and these things can become they can snowball really. But the other thing I would say, it's a slightly similar point, is toy manufacturers. If they make toys that are just for boys and toys that are just for girls, they sell twice as many toys. So they also are sort of perpetuating this idea that genders are very, very different. You have Barbie dolls and you have Lego. And Lego is advertised to boys. We all know that girls love Lego as well, and sometimes boys love Barbie dolls. That's actually a big kind of capitalism situation here, where the idea of gender is being forced onto kids. I remember in the 80s, we all had pudding bowl haircuts, no matter whether we were a boy or a girl. Boys used to wear those little leather shoes, which are now, I think, are quite feminist. feminine with the sort of T-bar at the front and frilly shirts and things. This idea that, you know, as soon as you go to Primark, the girls have to go to the Barbie pink section and the boys have to go to the Spider-Man T-shirt section. And if you show an interest in the Spider-Man T-shirt, maybe you're having gender issues, because how could you like the boys section T-shirt? So there's a lot of different spheres here where gender is, in many different ways and for different reasons and motivations, being sort of shoved down children and adults' throats.
Oh, Charlotte, I was a kid of the 80s as well, and let it be known that if we had known each other as little kids, I would have invited you to the wedding ceremony between He-Man and Barbie, with Mumra officiating and a whole cavalcade of My Little Ponies as part of the wedding profession. That was the perfect union of girls and boys' toys. Charlotte Griffiths, editor-at-large of The Mail on Sunday. Right, when we come back after the break, I want to hear from you on whatever we're talking about today, whatever you want to get off your chest, really. Should we have kept the Conservatives to under plan? Yes, there were legal battle after legal battle. The taxpayer, of course, every time there's a government challenge about legislation, is paying both the legal bills of the government and the legal bills of the people challenging it. And it was becoming very costly. And we remember looking at that plane on the runway not taking off. And I remember saying, that plane ain't ever going to take off, because there's way too many people trying to prevent that from happening. And if it does, there's not going to be anyone on it anyway. But if we had stuck with it, could we have gotten somewhere? Was it really working as a deterrent, or is that just all lip service? And what now about Sir Keir Starmer and the egg on his face? Albania saying, oh, that's not, you know, don't have one egg, have an entire multi-person omelette all over your paste. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call if you want to let me know what you think about all of this, or indeed overcrowding in prisons, or indeed treatment for trans toddlers. 87222 is the number to send me a text message. Write the word talk before your message. That way it comes into this studio here and doesn't get lost. We're on X at talkTV, and I'm back after this. In a million years, even if I really exercise myself, even if I really try and understand what is divisive about Island of Strangers, I can't find anything in it. We're an island, yes, and if people don't know each other because they're not saying hello to each other on the street, they're strangers. What is so divisive about saying Island of Strangers?
I just think it's unnecessary, and it's a bit exclusionary.
It's
and
not,
it's a bit
it's just
I think it is.
words.
And I think it's no, but words matter, and language matters in politics. It does.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Oh my goodness. So I don't know about you. I love a bit of camping. I'm the first person to want to like whack out her canvas and get underneath it, and proper camping though. You know what I'm talking about. I love a good tent. But you know, in absence of a tent, I would do a bit of glamping. Anything that just puts me somewhere that isn't the usual sort of four walls and a bed. Well, it turns out I should look no further than our abandoned prison estate, because loads of you are messaging in about the sheer number of prisons where you can go and spend a night, have a rave, eat. Like Henry Hill was saying earlier, HMP Shrewsbury is a tourist attraction now. They do escape rooms out of prison cells. Is that a good idea? And I'm pretty sure you can pay to stay there overnight in a cell. They also have dance and rave nights with DJs and disco lights. I mean, for God's sakes, what next? One close to home for you, says Dan in Gloucester. Very close to home, as Gloucester is where I was born and bred. Gloucester Prison is closed. We went to a wrestling night there a few months ago. Shout out to Evolution Wrestling. Good night on the Zyder. I mean, I knew Gloucester Prison's been closed for quite a while. I know it. It's down near the quays there, because I know Gloucester better than most people know the back of their hand. But I mean, why are all these prisons being closed down? Hi, Alex. Gloucester, Shrewsbury and Lancaster are all closed and now tourist attractions. I believe Barlinnie in Glasgow is earmarked for closure and similar next year, says Steve in Chorley. I'll tell you what, if you want to go and visit an abandoned prison as a tourist attraction, Little Dean Jail is quite the sight to behold. Some of you listening will be like, oh, I know what she's talking about. Ooh. Most of you won't. And all you need to do is read the reviews on TripAdvisor and you'll be like, oh, right, yeah, that's an interesting premise. Right, let's speak to Chris, who is in Epsom. Hi there, Chris.
Hi, Alex. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm always jolly. You know me. Through trials and tribulations, there's a smile on my face. What about you?
Yeah, always a smile on my face. I'll put a bigger one on your face, though.
Go on.
I've not visited, so don't accuse me. The best converted prison is the one in Wales called The Cell.
Yeah.
And it's a sex swingers club with bondage chambers.
Right, that actually makes Little Dean Jail, that I was just referring to, look like some sort of Mother Teresa outlet. I mean, who knew that there were so many, you know, so much in the prison, former prison recreation category? I don't know how much more I can ask you about what goes on in that prison in Wales and what they do with the handcuffs.
Well, listen, I phoned up about Albania. Let's go there. One of the reasons, and it's not come out, nobody mentioned it yet, Eddie Raymer's only just won re-election this week.
Oh, so you think is he just trying to like sort of look tough and push back against a bigger nation to sort of win some accolades, or? I
think so, and also, there's a lot of problems between Albania and Macron, because Albania was supposed to accede to the EU not last January, the January before. It was all agreed. They've been working for years to get their administrations in line.
Yeah.
And everybody voted yes except Macron, who vetoed it. And because the rules back then where it had to be unanimous, they didn't accede. So there's a lot of politics going on behind the scene there.
Chris, that is brilliant context that you have provided. And I mean, look, Albania actually makes up the largest cohort of organised crime in the United Kingdom. It's Albanian gangs. But yeah, I mean, thank goodness, actually, because if you have open borders with Albania, Lord knows what could go on. That's no offence to Albanians. Most of them are wonderful, law-abiding people. But there does seem to be a bit of a crime problem over there. Just saying. That was Chris in Epsom. And I'm glad we managed to divert away from what various prisons in Wales might be used for and what sort of societies that they're entertaining. Talking about entertainment, I'm going to be with you for the next couple of hours. Don't go anywhere. I'm going to drink this cup of tea and I'll see you on the other side.
We've just been talking in the office here about how many of us have been attacked at some point or other by some form of flying beast or any wildlife. I mean, so we'll take your stories this morning.
Hello, this story is concerning wildlife. It's concerning a rhino.
A rhino? Blimey.
Right? Yeah,
okay.
rhino. I used to live in Kenya when I was about 5 or 6 years old.
Okay.
And we were in this wildlife park in a grey Morris Minot. this rhino started chasing us. There's me and my sister in the back seat.
Right.
It was like something out of Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
We were turning around saying, "Believe it, Dad. Just put your foot down, Dad. We're in a field. Put your foot down." This rhino was chasing us.
One from Mark here in Derby. Went on holiday for our first romantic holiday to Tunisia years ago. Decided to take my girl into a petting zoo. I got a bag of food to feed the animals. A giant goat then went for me, putting its front legs over my shoulders and proceeding to headbutt me over a fence into one of the pens, covering me in the food and making my nose bleed. I got out of the pen, then the goat and all his mates attacked me again, sending me running and screaming like a girl out of the zoo, with my girlfriend rolling with laughter on the floor.
A tarantula climbed up the bottom of the bed on the sheet.
Yeah.
And it walked all the way up. It's eyeball to eyeball.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, what am I going to do when it climbs over my face? But then a miracle happened. It raised its two front legs and waved them around. And then it turned around and walked down the side of the sheet.
Boris Johnson been attacked by an ostrich. The former PM was enjoying a safari trip with his family when the bird leaned into his car and went oi oi and pecked his hand. In footage shared online, he quickly jerked from the ostrich. Don't dirty minds away from the ostrich, and shouted, "Oh, Christ, get hell," before driving off. And so I just set it out there. Have you been attacked by an animal? When I was about 7, says Trevor Jenkins, on holiday in Spain in the 70s, a monkey pulled my long hair. It was long because in the 70s I was in floods of tears. And as the family car drove out the car park, an elephant ripped off the car mirror. We got the message. Spanish animals aren't to be trusted. Jeremy, Brittany here from the United States. I was spurred by a rooster in my right foot a few years ago. Spurred? How do you get spurred by a rooster?
And one here from Dan in
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello, welcome back to the show. This is Alex Phillips. I'm with you until 7 o'clock today. And this is my second stint at doing Drive this week. And what a lovely stint it is as well. I really do enjoy it. And I hope wherever you are, you're being able to begin that process of relaxing for the evening. Hopefully the day's work is done. You're dreaming of dinner, perhaps popping a cork on a bottle of wine. Who knows? Whatever you're doing, if you're driving, be careful. But I'm here to keep you company and to keep you informed and entertained. But guess what? I need your help with this. I need your help with this because we are called Talk, which means that that's what we like to do, including you. So keep your thoughts coming in. I'm going to be reading some more of your messages and hopefully taking some of your calls. The number's on the screen right now. 03444991000 is the number to dial if you'd like to be vetted by the wonderful Lauren and determine that you pass muster and you can be patched through to the studio. If you'd like to use that number to send a WhatsApp message, you may do so. It is entirely free of charge. You can also leave me a voice note using that particular mechanism and hopefully I'll get the chance to play it out on air. If you'd rather send a text message, it's 87222. You've got to write the word talk before your message. Everything is your standard network rate anyway. So what is stopping you? I'm just going to do some of the messages now before we throw ourselves straight back into analysing the politics of all of it. Paul says, Rwanda would have worked if we sent the illegal immigrants straight there, off the boats to be processed. Then they would have had the choice of confirming who they are and where they are from to get processed. If they don't, they'd have the right to stay only there or go home. And someone else says, Malcolm says, I think the Rwanda scheme did work. Look, when they started rounding people up off the flights, they all started scurrying off to Ireland. Well, that's what we heard, that it was actually having a deterrent effect. On the subject of the NHS still having appointments available to parents to take their toddlers if they worry their toddlers might be trans. Becca in Norfolk says, if a nursery school-aged child says anything about being trans, the parents and or nursery should be investigated for child abuse. You know, I kind of think, here. If a boy thinks they're a girl one day or a girl thinks they're a boy one day, let them get on with it. Children play make-believe. Children like crawl around on their hands and knees pretending to be animals. You know, it doesn't mean they are one, but if they're actually starting to use the language of, I think I really am trapped inside the other body, I think I might be trans, then they have clearly been exposed to that warped, evil, abusive ideology that should have no place within nursery schools or schools. Right, let's now speak on the phone to Laura McEvatt, who's a former Conservative special advisor, to go through the political angle of everything happening in the news today. Lauren, welcome aboard HMS Common Sense. Talking about HMS Common Sense, if such a vessel did exist, then perhaps it could be patrolling the channel and picking up people from dinghies and taking them back from whence they came, or else a far-flung Shetland island. But that is not going to happen. Instead, your government, the Conservative government, came up with the Rwanda scheme, which essentially was planning to take people for processing abroad. And this got shut down and opposed by legal entities, largely because of the concept of a little-known word, refoulement, which is where they could have been sent to Rwanda and then sent on somewhere else beyond our jurisdiction of managing that situation. And so Sir Keir Starmer said, we're not going to do that. That's not workable. That's not within sensible legal parameters. No, 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 no. When people have been turned down, once their applications have been processed and they're not allowed to stay, we'll then send them to Albania as a deportation hub. And the Albanian PMs turned around and said, nope, not on your Nelly. We're not helping you out, sunshine. The thing I kind of think here, though, is they're not really, it's comparing apples and oranges, the Rwanda plan and the Albanian plan. With the Albanian plan, how many people would have ended up in Albania to be deported anyway? I mean, it just all seems to me to be a house of cards. Do you think the Rwanda plan could have worked?
Not while we were in the ECHR. I think that there was far too much ambiguity within the law that was being created, that the ECHR and the lawyers in London who practice the kind of law that allows them to basically be political advocates through the legal system. I think that they were always going to find avenues to be able to reject the possibility that we could deport people in advance of anything being finalized in how they were settled in the United Kingdom. This, by the way, is the reason why we had difficulties back in the day with the piracy issues in Somalia. That, you know, if we arrested pirates who were trying to board British vessels, they'd have to be tried in the European courts on the grounds that the Somali courts would not be within the ECHR realm of acceptability. So this is an issue that's shown up in multiple areas over the course of the last 20 years or so, and we have not found a solution to it yet. I think that Keir Starmer's plan, well, if Albania are already rejecting it, I think Keir Starmer's plan is also going to find that it's got difficulties with the ECHR. And at the heart of this is his inability to accept that we're going to have a conversation about human rights law in this country if we want to have a sensible conversation about dealing with migration issues.
Why on earth are so many politicians wedded to the concept of the ECHR? OK, so it's got the word human rights in it. That sounds nice. That sounds like something we shouldn't be abolishing. Otherwise, we're going to be mad, tyrannical overlords. But at the end of the day, it boils down to there being a court which can overrule the democratic processes in Parliament, overrule the Supreme Court in the UK. It's essentially delegating the highest level of power to unknowns in Strasbourg. Why on earth is it that the Conservatives were divided over this, that in that white paper put forward by the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper saying this is how we're going to take 100,000 off overwhelming amounts of immigration anyway, we never hear about actually the way we do this? The easiest and first step to take is to leave the court that overrules any decision we have to make on these issues.
There is a communications problem that exists around this. You know, Winston Churchill was involved in the original legislation that set this thing up. There is a feeling of Britain at the end of the Second World War having been a bastion against, you know, tyrannical forces within Europe during the war and setting up, you know, processes that meant that things like that could never happen again. But the way the world has moved and the way that the legal systems of the world has moved in the intervening years means that there needs to be a very serious conversation, because people are able to move around the world much more easily than they were 75 years ago, and that was not envisaged in the original drafting of this set of documents. We have an issue around more and more countries reaching middle income status where people are more able to afford to pay a trafficker than they were previously coming from that nation. And that is going to see more and more people able to make the financial decision to leave their point of origin and try and get to Europe for a better life. And we also don't have an adequate understanding of the difference in definitions between asylum, refugee seeking, economic migration seeking. These are all very different approaches to wanting to move countries without, first applying and receiving a visa to do so. And we need to have very serious conversations about what those definitions mean. But at the heart of this is a communications problem that the Conservative Party in government and that the Labour Party in government had of not wanting to be called fascists, basically, because this set of documents was created as a result of the horrors of the Second World War in Europe. And neither government has really worked out how to get itself over that communications hurdle yet.
I mean, you say that, and I do agree with you. I do agree because I say it myself. Doing things like uprooting and binning elements of the Human Rights Act, if not the whole blimmin' thing, and leaving the European courts on human rights does make a country sound rather despotic, simply because the word human rights is in there. And so it is kind of hard to sell that to people who would jump up and go, this is terrible, this is dangerous, this is a drift towards the far right, this is extremist. And yet, when you look at the article today in The Telegraph, it shows that half of UK voters support freezing all non-essential immigration immediately. So they're saying, OK, if we desperately need doctors who come from other countries so we can keep the NHS functioning fine, but otherwise, absolutely none. Freeze it. So clearly it can't be that much of a hard sell. And yet, do you think, even if the Conservatives come out, post-Ozempic, generic, head shaved, banging the drum for tough controls on borders, can the Conservatives regain the trust of voters on this issue?
I think it's going to be very tough for us to do so. I just, a couple of weeks ago, I was back at home in Gloucestershire, which is, I know where you're from as well, campaigning for a friend of mine in the local elections. And we heard this come up on the doorstep regularly. And it was to our benefit that our local candidate was very local. Is a fourth generation farmer from our area, which really, really helped us. But we had a lot of Conservative voters on the doorstep saying, look, I don't particularly like Nigel Farage as an individual. I don't dislike what Reform is saying. And I think that you guys dropped the ball on migration. And I don't understand how anything that you've tried to do afterwards is going to win my trust back in relation to this, because you took a vote that was to a large degree about migration in 2016, and you turned it into an even bigger problem. And I don't see how I can vote for you again after that. We have a lot of trust to make up in how we address those issues with the electorate. And a lot of that has to come down to really solid, tangible suggestions about how to alter the course of how this country deals with migration in general. And some of that can be, a full plan for how we leave the European Convention on Human Rights. Some of that can be about how we humanely deal with the people who are here. That is really important here. Everybody in the United Kingdom, for the most part, believes in the humane treatment of other humans. And to say that people don't is incredibly disingenuous. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we are doing it correctly at the moment, or that we shouldn't be having any further conversations about how it is we treat people when they are here, how long they should stay here, whether or not they are deported immediately upon arrival, or whether or not they are processed into the asylum system and deported if they fail in that process. I think all these are conversations that the Conservative Party has tried to have in the last 20 years, failed to have particularly well, and needs now to come up with some concrete solutions before the electorate will ever trust us again on this issue.
I mean, but ironically, what's interesting is that recent polling that has come out suggests that if Boris Johnson were to be at the helm of the Conservative Party, that they could romp to victory over Reform yet again. And yet when you talk about it, and I think you put that so eloquently, the 2016 referendum vote, people were very concerned about control of borders, amongst other issues. And then that converted into a big Conservative majority in the snap election of 2019. And then Boris Johnson, finally, one would think, would have the opportunity to really start putting some right-wing magic in place over the United Kingdom. And yet it was Boris Johnson who put in place some of the policies now that Reform are capitalising on. He sort of went hell for leather on net zero. He also adjusted things like the salary thresholds for worker visas, which meant more and more people were coming across, dependency visas for even students bringing their loved ones to Britain with them. And yet he is still considered in some corners of the Conservative Party as the solution to the problem.
I think that there are sections of the Conservative Party that will call for the return of Boris Johnson like the Messiah for the rest of his life. And I think that's because in the modern history of the Conservative Party, we have never found an individual who is raised so positively by so many people who may not be traditional Conservative voters. That does not necessarily mean that after what happened under his premiership, people would be willing to put a cross in the Conservative box again, because at the same point you see a lot of people saying, "Oh, well, it's just Boris, and it's just Boris. It's just how he is. He shoots from the hip. He's a freewheeling guy." For as many people who say that, you have people saying, well, my brother and sister couldn't attend the funeral for my mother, and you had parties in Downing Street. You really went to the mattresses over people in your party who had allegations against them that meant that you really shouldn't have been defending them to the end, as in the way that you did. And I think that all of those issues will continue to bubble were he to come back. And I think that it's not just reform, by the way. I think the Labour Party will make enormous capital out of what is referred to as the Boris wave of migration. Attributing a large portion of the increase in migration directly to a name brand. Having a name brand can hurt you as much as it helps you in some ways. And in this arena, the Boris wave language would kill us with the electorate if we were making headway in how we can win trust again on the issue of migration.
You also said something earlier which I want to pick up on, because we keep hearing conversations now, particularly the Labour Party in that white paper, sounding the sort of starting gun for we need to do something about integration. We don't want to be an island of strangers. We need to make sure that we can act together as cohesive communities. And I think here, we all agree, but nobody is explaining how. I personally don't think whipping out the odd English language lesson is going to suddenly turn most of Leicester into one giant kumbaya. So what on earth could be done in order to promote the concepts of integration, and how radical do those policies need to be?
I would say that the policies have to be fairly radical. I think they probably have to go beyond issues of I tend to avoid using the phrase the English language rather than the British native languages, because, of course, we also should be talking about Welsh, which is obviously my political background. The Welsh language is important. It is written into the current immigration law that you can request to take the Life in the UK test in the Welsh language, should you choose to. It is important that we don't just talk about English. I was quite unhappy that Keir Starmer was only talking about English. I realise some of your callers may think that this is an unimportant or a flippant remark, but if we talk, for example, about the social care sector in Wales, there are a lot of older people with dementia and Alzheimer's who are first language Welsh speakers who will reach a point in their care where they forget that they are English speakers. And so having people who can speak Welsh reduces social isolation. But in terms
of integration, because this is where it gets thorny, isn't it? Because, is a government prepared to stand up and go, right, we're going to ban hijabs in schools, we're going to say the burqas have no place in UK society, that, services in religious institutions have to happen in English so they can be monitored? I mean, what does integration look like when it's being sort of practiced by the state?
It's very difficult to say, because so many different nations do this differently. France has the laïcité methodology, which is there is no state religion, and therefore all vestiges of religion within the state are basically not acceptable. And that is how they have been able to level the playing field on integration without giving in to the more extreme elements of some religions who would wish to see those religions be over and above Frenchness within the system. You have the American option where basically being American becomes the religion. You pledge allegiance to a flag in the morning. The Americanism itself becomes a form of practice of religion. If you look at the political religion elements of it, that's another solution. But we have a state religion in England. We don't have a disestablished church in England, which could, in theory, present some legal difficulties were we to try and use the basis of religion or religious, sort of visible religious usage of clothing or symbols of any kind, it could be difficult for us to start banning things, because technically the state is a semi-religious state in England. It's very difficult to say how we can roll back on some of the issues in the last 20 years that have led to such profound levels of a lack of integration in parts of this country. And I don't know that anybody has good answers for this, but I really hope that somebody finds some soon.
Well, this is the thing, this is the big question. I think, when Brits are worried about immigration, very often we constantly get given the economic argument, don't we? Well, it's good for the economy. And then the ONS says, well, that might have been a little bit souped up. Maybe a lot of immigration hasn't been the sort of silver bullet to GDP growth that we all thought it was going to be. And then people say, well, this, that, well, language. At the end of the day, you've got to break some eggs to make an omelette. And I fear that as much as people pay lip service to the concept of integration, like you've just said, putting together a policy framework of how this can magically be created at the behest of the state is a far more complicated issue. Lauren, thank you ever so much. Listen, let's not get overexcited about this question. OK, that's my little disclaimer. That's my health warning. Let's not get too excited. But I'd like to hear your thoughts. What does integration look like? What policies should be in place to make sure that when people come to this country from wherever they may have come from, that they are part of this country, that everyone gets along? What does it look like? And I think we can all think right now to relatives, neighbours, friends and colleagues from other countries that have slipped in quite nicely into the framework of Britishness and love this country. I think to my own Turkish next door neighbours who are wonderful people who adore Britain. And we cherish those people who have come into this country because they love this country, because they want to be part of this country, because they think it's a better place than where they came from. But I think we can also think of examples where that people who have come into this country perhaps don't share that particular framework of mind. So what do we actually do? What would a policy look like to make sure that people living here all bind together? Like I said, be careful. 03444 99 1000 is the number to call. You can also leave me a voice note on that number on WhatsApp, or send me a WhatsApp message as well. 87222 is the number to text. Write the word talk before your message. I'm just going to read some of your messages now, and then when we come back after the break, we're going to be delving into the world of geopolitics because a lot is going on there. Tim has messaged saying he's a veteran, served for 10 years to protect my country from invasion and war. Why did I bother? These politicians are funding an invasion. Mike from Cleveley's in Lancashire has messaged, and we like the sound of Mike in Lancashire. I'm sure he's a really top-drawer individual, but when you hear this first sentence, I think you're going to go off him. I'm sat here in my hot tub with a beer. That's right. Mike's living his best life, pondering how easy it would be to stop the boats. The real reason this isn't happening is because this and previous governments don't want to do it. The ECHR is the main stumbling block for us doing what is necessary. Come out of the ECHR and the problem's solved. It really is that simple. Well, perhaps the solution to all our problems is getting the cabinet round the table, well, in a hot tub together, having a Baileys or two, and then perhaps we might actually make some headway. I was about to say, Mike, I wish I was there with you, but I'm not quite sure whether you're sort of clothed or unclothed, so I'm going to reserve my enthusiasm for your hot tub at this moment in time. Hi Alex, when the Rwanda plan was first mooted, I thought it was nonsense, but the closer it got to implementation, I believed it would work. All it needed was for the word to be put around on the other side of the channel that the next 2,000 channel crossers will be immediately flown to Rwanda. Crossings would have ground to a halt. That's from Chris in Ottershaw. I've always said the optics of just one boat being turned around and dragged back to France would be enough to send shockwaves through the international community. It would make horrific headlines. There would be outrage at the fact that Britain had the audacity to actually turn a boat around and send it back from whence it came. But all of that free publicity might have been the best deterrent yet. Who knows? Right, after the break, I'm going to be catching up with Colonel Simon Diggins, military and defence analyst, on where we are at with those proposed peace talks in Turkey between Russia and Ukraine. That's after this.
they're trying to play broker, peace broker in a way, which is ironic given that they were harboring Hamas. So there's a gray area here, and I think the president has to be careful because obviously he can't accept a gift personally, but if it's a gift from country to country and they use Air Force One, as the president's plane, okay, fine. It's a bit of a distraction given all.
That's a bit of a security risk, surely.
Yeah, of course. That's something to think about too,
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. Well, it seemed like there has been a little bit of momentum towards the idea that there could be not just a ceasefire, but a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. That's the form of words that people have been using since the Second World War. But both President Putin and Trump have been absent from Istanbul peace talks, which have been largely delegations representing the nations. And Volodymyr Zelensky has criticised Russia's delegation as actually lacking any body of decision-making authority. So is this all smoke and mirrors? Is this mere pantomime, or have we actually started to see the first steps being taken towards ending bloodshed in Ukraine? Let's speak to Simon Diggins, military and defence analyst. Simon, thank you for coming on the programme. I mean, what do you make of these peace talks in Turkey? Do they have any substance to them?
Alex, good afternoon to you. I think they do. It doesn't mean necessarily they're going to succeed, but that we've had at one stage potentially 3 presidents on the move. We had President Erdogan, who'd actually called the talks. President Zelensky was actually talking to him, and there was indications from both Washington and Moscow that if the circumstances were right, that their 2 respective presidents would also fly down. Now, that also seems to have gone slightly into a slow pause time at the moment. And today we also had a sort of ritual shouting at each other.
Oh, the gremlins have got into Simon's system, it seems. Let's see if we can dial him back up and flush out some of the little zombie noises that were happening on that particular line, because we do need his analysis, because otherwise I've got to give it to you. Mine's pretty patchy. I wonder, actually, when it comes to whenever people want to host, to be the interlocutors in a situation and want to host both sides, there's always something in it for them. There's always something to gain for them particularly. And I think to what's going on at the moment with Donald Trump going around the Middle East and the role that Qatar has played in being the interlocutor between Hamas and America and Hamas and Israel. And people go, oh, Qatar, evil state, headquarters of Hamas in Doha. How despicable. They play both sides. They're not to be trusted. And yet Trump's been over in the Middle East speaking to the regional allies there and had a huge motorcade of cyber trucks welcoming into Qatar, including that really snazzy looking plane that they've given him, which apparently he's going to keep and then is going to go into his museum stroke mausoleum, whatever it is, after it's out of service. But Hamas have been very keen to sort of push themselves as an ally to the West in this, and people would say, well, actually they were hosting Hamas in Doha at the behest of people like the CIA who wanted to keep eyes on. So I kind of wonder what Erdogan's game is here. Why is he so keen to play the role of interlocutor between Russia and Ukraine? We can reconnect with Simon now and let him pick up where he left off about whether or not these talks do have substance, and can we be tentatively positive? Simon?
I think we can, but I mean, it's very cautious. I think your tone is absolutely spot on. It's actually, we're not, it's very much small steps. I mean, we heard from the Russian delegation leader, who originally President Zelensky said was a very junior negotiator, that he saw this as a continuation of the talks in 2022. Now, they were disastrous, and basically it was Russia at its most arrogant in terms of its maximalist demands on Ukraine. On the other hand, positively, President Erdogan has been talking about Crimea's status, and particularly that, as far as he's concerned, it remains an integral part of Ukraine's territorial sovereignty. So the fact that those two statements are still in place and they're still talking means that potentially something positive might come out of these talks.
I mean, talk to me about Turkey's role in all of this, because what is so fascinating is that this sort of peace negotiation is taking place in Turkey, given that Turkey is actually a NATO member state.
No, absolutely. But of course, it's also a Black Sea power. And that's also important to them. For them, it's really critical that the Black Sea remains what it always has been, as a sort of major source of commerce and traffic through from there. And so they do find themselves, and very much they have been right through the history of Turkey and NATO, as a sort of frontline state. And they're still the frontline state in the sense that the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, who are also Black Sea powers, is directly affecting Turkey and Turkey's commerce. And in the past, we've had closer relations between Russia and Turkey as well, while it still remains part of NATO. So I think it has, as the Foreign Office say, it has a locus in all of these things. In other words, it has a stake, a place in all of these for all sorts of important reasons.
Yeah, like he's at the centre of a Venn diagram almost. Before I let you know, go Simon, I want to get your take on Trump in the Middle East, because he seems to be very comfortable when he's on a diplomatic jaunt in that part of the world. Not traditionally something that American presidents rush off to do, but especially sort of making deals with Saudi Arabia to share weaponry, and then after that went off to Qatar, where there was a royal welcome, quite frankly, with the sort of Cybertruck motorcades, this flashy aeroplane, people in his party and the Democrats going, ooh, except that plane, it looks a bit funny. But Qatar is a really important Western ally, particularly to America, given, is it 10,000 troops who are based there? Oh, do you know, we've lost Simon again. There's some sort of strange thing at play here where we're never going to get the information we need out of him because there's bugs in the system. We're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid, and hopefully we'll be able to catch up with Simon soon, because there's a lot more to come out from the Middle East in terms of headlines. I can tell you that much. Trump, desperate to be lauded for being the great peacemaker. He did, of course, sort of get those Abraham Accords signed around the Middle East, which some people say caused the backlash from the Iranian proxies, who frankly don't want to see a settlement between Israel and their neighbouring countries. But he's at it again, and so far brokering some pretty impressive deals with some of the wealthier states in the Middle East, which might tick off Iran. But interesting to see how all of this develops. As you guys know, if you're a regular listener, I'm fascinated by geopolitics. I also wonder as well, with Trump's drill baby drill initiative, whether he needs to go and make friends with some of those OPEC nations who largely control the cost of oil by determining how many barrels of the stuff are produced. Oh, so much to wrap our heads around. Now, we're going to go to a short break now, but when I come back, it's more of your calls, more of your messages. If you want to join the conversation, the number is 0344 499 1000. Dial it now, and we're going to be ready to accept your call. You can also use that number to send me a WhatsApp or leave me a voice note on WhatsApp. 87222 is the number to text. Right talk before your message. I'm back after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. I was just casting my eyes over the news screen. I saw Rachel Reeves and I'm like, she's got a new barnet. She's had her hair coloured a different colour, hasn't she? They've softened her makeup a bit, less of a Lego head. Sorry, that's just by the by, really. Always interested in looking at, how people change over the years. Robert Jenrick's probably had the greatest revolution in appearance of all of them. Getting distracted now. Let's speak to Simon, who is in Warwickshire. Hi there, Simon.
Hi, Alex. Great show. Lovely to speak to you.
Oh,
I don't know what. Every time I call up, you say I'm in Warwickshire.
Where are you, really?
Well, I live in Dorset, but currently I'm at Sutton Scotney on the A34. I'm a lorry driver.
You're not a lorry driver. Amazing. Well, maybe at the one point you sort of called in from the truck. You were passing through Warwickshire. What sort of lorry do you drive?
Time I called you. An Arctic. I'm on containers at the moment for another week, and then I'm changing jobs. I'm going to another company.
Is it? Blimey. I'll tell you what, my dad was a lorry driver. He used to drive an Arctic as well, car transporter. Massive pieces of machinery, that. Best reverse parkers in the world. You'll be nifty when you've reached retirement. You'll get that caravan and you'll put them all to shame on the campsite. Now, Simon, what's on your mind?
Just the nonsense that Starmer came out with on Monday. You say that you're not sure about the, what was it he said? Island of Strangers.
Yeah, why are people so offended by that?
Well, I mean, he was channeling Enoch Powell, and I looked up the speech of Enoch Powell, and it doesn't actually say exactly those words. But if he's trying to court the Reform voters, we're going to see right through him.
Yeah.
We've got to have a root and branch change of the politicians in this country. And I think reform is the only sort of shoot of hope we've got.
Yeah, well, some people might say other parties are available. I've got to say that as an independent broadcaster. But we are living through a time of great political change, probably because we are living through a period of great societal change. I mean, 10 years ago, there was no conversation about immigration, really. And now people are suddenly going, we're reaching such a critical point. If we don't do something now, if someone doesn't do something, then perhaps we're at the point of no return. And so a lot of people are looking at the Conservatives and said, well, we tried you, that didn't work. Looking at Labour going, you're the last thing that's going to actually make a difference in this situation, and saying perhaps we need, like you said, a whole root and branch reappointment of everybody in politics, potentially the civil service as well.
Definitely the civil service. I think the rot has really set in the civil service. They're guilty of a lot more than we will ever know, really.
Yeah, I think you're right. Someone was once telling me that cabinet ministers basically are given the notes to take to cabinet by the most senior civil servant in their department, and they just sit around a table reading off a sheet of paper. That actually most politicians, even at the highest level, are just marionettes, and it's all these sort of Hugos on Whitehall who are doing everything.
I mean, years ago, I didn't realise that Yes, Prime Minister was a documentary. I thought it was a comedy show.
Where are you from? You say you live in Dorset now and you're a lorry driver, but something about your accent makes me think you're from the North East.
Well, I'm from the Labour heartland of the North East, Durham.
My dad was from Durham. My dad was a lorry driver from Durham. Simon, you're basically like, my other father.
Oh, don't say that.
Yeah, you say basically a lorry driver from Durham who now lives in the West Country. I mean...
I had to pull over because I came over all unnecessary when you were talking about getting in a hot tub with somebody.
Oh, well.
Your dad.
Yeah, the less we say about hot tub activity, I think the better. Don't want to get people hot under the collar, do I? How much further you got to drive tonight, Simon? What time do you pull up?
Well, I've pulled up because I've got to take a 45-minute break.
Yeah.
Because of the laws we live under.
Tachograph says so, and all that.
I had 6 minutes to spare.
Aye.
So.
Okay, right. Finally, most important question to ask any lorry driver: what's the best service station in the UK?
they're all rubbish, but the best truck park there's two.
Yeah.
ADS in Stoke-on-Trent.
Yeah.
Big shout out to those guys. And there's one just north of the Dartford Tunnel, whose name escapes me at the moment.
Well, there you go, folks. I tell you what, for Father's Day last year, I actually bought my dad top trump service stations. Honestly, like the lorry drivers know everything. The height of every single bridge, where you can get the best cup of coffee, the best place to have a kip for the night, the nicest toilets and shower blocks, where the McDonald's serve the freshest burgers. I mean, seriously, lorry drivers really, I think, if you think taxi drivers in London have the knowledge, wait till you meet a proper lorry driver. They're literally like tom-toms. Thank you to Simon. Let's speak to Daryl, who's in Lincoln. Hi, Daryl.
Hi, how you doing? All right. I'm another lorry driver.
Hey, I love it. Yes to the lorry drivers. Do you know, I doff my cap at all lorry drivers because I saw how blimmin' hard my dad worked. And then during COVID, when I was like, I'll clap for the NHS, while teachers were like sunbathing and everyone else was sitting under blankets. And lorry drivers were treated like rubbish. They closed the service stations. And without lorry drivers, you got no medicines in hospitals. You got no food on shelves. Everything grinds to a halt. So I always say we got to celebrate our lorry drivers because they have a tough old job. Anyway, said my piece.
I worked out that if lorry drivers went on strike for just 1 week, the country would grind to a halt in 3 days.
Yeah, well, I think if lorry drivers just went on strike for 1 day, the country would grind to a halt.
It would. Your last call, he was on about, I think he was on about Mardyke Truck Park, which is near Dartford Bridge, by the way. It's a really good services, though.
There you go, you see? I love this. Like, lorry drivers of the world, phone in and let me know your favourite service station. For, like, posh people who are just going about in their cars on a trip down to Devon, apparently Gloucester Services has some of the best. Like, you know, Gloucester Services, you can go and get, like, you know, proper butcher's staff, bakeries. It's almost like a farmer's market down there. Of course it is, because Gloucester's awesome.
Yeah, it's a nice one, that is. Yeah, I know the one you were talking about.
But anyway, we weren't supposed to be doing a show on service stations, although I'm open to the prospect, if I'm honest with you. What else do you want to talk about?
Well, just your thing about people integrating into this country from abroad when they come and live here. I think a lot of people who criticise them are people who've never lived abroad themselves, because I used to live in Saudi Arabia, and I've also lived in Morocco, and it's okay when you go to these countries for 2 or 3 weeks on a holiday, you want to engulf yourself in their culture to find out, which is great, and you know, and it's really nice to do that. But when you've been living in that country for like months and months and months, okay, you live their way of life, but if something comes up that's similar to your country, like I remember finding a fish and chip shop in Jeddah once, which was run by a British couple, and they'd got like a little make-believe pub, although there was no alcohol in there, obviously. It was like an English pub. And we went wild over that. It was just so fantastic, because we'd not seen anything like it for months. And when you are living in a foreign country, you really do miss being at home. And you know, you tend to gravitate towards other people from your country. So when you see somebody from Nigeria who's living in this country, for example, you know, if they see another Nigerian, or they see a Nigerian cafe or something, then they're going to obviously gravitate towards it, because even though they like living in your country and that, you know, they love everything about it, they do miss home, because everybody does. It's just natural, you know. So I don't think we should criticise people for sometimes wanting to be with people of their own country.
It's just natural. It's part of the human condition. Do you know, I agree so much with what you say, because I've lived abroad a lot, and certainly when I was in India, everyone else I knew was sort of the nurses working in India, people teaching over in India. We used to all hang out together. I was also really good mates with all my Indian colleagues at a newspaper called The Hindu, which is one of their most successful broadsheets, and would spend a lot of time with them and ate the local Indian food. And also down in South India where I lived, you couldn't get meat even if you wanted to, and if you did, it looked like some weird archaeological project. The animals were so skinny and the butchery was so vague. So there was a degree of integration. But then, you know, when I lived in China, I didn't speak any Mandarin. No one spoke any English. And so a bit like you said, same when I lived in Ghana, Accra, there used to be, I don't know if it's still there, there used to be something that was sort of made up to look like an English pub just outside of a district called Osu in Accra. And you naturally do gravitate towards the things that remind you of home with people from home, because you've got all this stuff in common. You can talk about what's going on back at home, the music, the culture. It is natural and human to do that. So maybe the big challenge is numbers, really, that if you have so many people coming in, there's no need, because in India, yes, I might have known, in South India, I might have known sort of 5 or 6 other expats in Tamil Nadu, in the city of Madurai, where I lived, but actually it was overwhelmingly Dravidian. And so, you know, we were sort of a small number within a wider culture. And so you spend time with your work colleagues. And language as well in South India. I mean, I was pretty rubbish at Tamil. That is a complex polysyllabic language. But the newspaper was written in English. And so I was able to converse with my colleagues, work with them. We used to go to each other's houses. But you make a very important point, Daryl. I appreciate that. And can I just say, I appreciate you, and a shout out to any other lorry drivers listening. I love you guys and gals. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but when I come back, it is going to be time for the sports update. The PGA Golf Championship starts today, and I don't know if you've seen the footage of that horrific what would you call it, collision with the goalposts of, I don't even know how to say his name, A1E. I've seen the footage. Well, thankfully, Sam Ellard's going to be joining us after this to explain exactly what went on when that poor footballer collided with the goalpost, and the fact he had to be put into an induced coma, and perhaps it's down to sporting regulations. All of that is going to be demystified, and the names will be pronounced properly after this.
Rupert Lowe is front and foremost in that battle. And yet here it was, Nigel Farage and their Youssef, in their pursuit to completely control reform and not able to take any form of criticism. They sought not just to destroy his reputation, they sought to imprison this man. And every fear I had about Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe, and their Youssef, forgive me, at that point was absolutely confirmed to me.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello welcome back to the show. Let's rattle through some of your messages before we go through all of the big sports news of the day. Someone's messaged in, didn't leave their name, saying one way to put a stop to all the legal issues is to stop paying for migrants' legal fees. They'd then be forced to find the money another way, and I'm sure in most cases they will not be successful and just go back home. This is what I've never understood, right? You know, yes, I do believe we have to have a system where you can challenge the law and appeal something, but 3 appeals? 4 appeals? I mean, it just seems there's constant time wasting, money wasting, and we, the taxpayer, are defending the government in these legal cases and actually challenging the government. We pay both sides of those bills. And why on earth should people who've broken into the country have access to free lawyers when you don't have that if you're, you know, facing issues in the family courts or some other sort of position as Joe Public? It's a madness. It's frankly taking the proverbial. Hi, Alex. Cracking show as usual. Why, thank you to Julian. It's incredible how the Tories still talk as if we have 1,000 years to sort this immigration issue out. They're disingenuous and docile on this issue, to put it politely. The ship UK has been sinking for 30 years and still they just burble the same old idle, incoherent rubbish. The Tory MPs had better find themselves proper jobs in the real world before the next general election. Nigel has them all rattled. And someone else's message, if I get in a boat and float to France and say I'm claiming asylum, what happens? Just interested to know what the double standard looks like. Yeah, do you know what? It'd be interesting, actually, if we sort of, you know, took away some of these benefits, the hotels, the housing, the pocket money, whether you'd start finding dinghies going in the opposite direction. It is time now for a big old sports roundup with Sam Ellard, Talk Sport presenter. Hello to you, Sam.
Hi, Alex. How are you?
I'm all right, my darling. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Nice to be back doing sport with you. It's been too long.
It has been too long, and you are the best in the business, aren't you?
Well, why wasn't I on your show yesterday then?
Well, you know, we just had to have the second best on, didn't we, really? You weren't available.
Oh, yes, somebody else on.
I don't know. I can't. You know, I do so many shows. I couldn't even tell you what I did in the last hour, let alone yesterday.
No,
but I did speak to someone in sport at some point in some show, and it weren't you. And they weren't as good as you, clearly.
Well.
Sam, tell me about the sport that I absolutely love. I can't wait to learn all about it. I'm being sarcastic. It's golf, but other people out there seem to love it. So explain to me, PGA Golf Championship. What's going on there?
Yeah, it's a big one. So this is the second major of the year in golf. In golf, there's 4 majors throughout the year. We had the first major a couple of weeks ago, and that was a pretty special weekend because Rory McIlroy won the Masters, completing a career Grand Slam, which means he's won every single major. Only 6 players have done that in history. So second major of the year just underway. Rory McIlroy nearly completed his first round. Not off to a particularly good start. He's actually 2 shots over par. So struggling at the moment. The Ryder Cup captain Luke Donald has 1 shot off the lead. Very, very early stage. It'd be good to see the Englishman Luke Donald. He's 4 under. Jaeger and Gerrard at 5s, but still really, really early on day one. Lots of big name golfers yet to even start their rounds. The likes of Justin Thomas and Bryson DeChambeau yet to play. But really, main headline, I think, early on day one, Alex, is Rory McIlroy, Masters champion, off to a tricky start, 2 over as he's nearly finished his first round.
So I remember my best friend once asking me a really good question, saying, if you could be any famous sort of sports person, what sport would you choose? And I immediately went Formula One, because I love Formula One. And I was like, it's brilliant, you know, it's so fast and it's this and that. And they said, yeah, but you've got to be a very particular weight and there's risk of death and maiming. And I was like, oh, he put me right off it. And he said, you know, that the sport you should choose, Alex, is golf. Because you basically go to these lovely resorts, sunny weather. You can be as fat as you like, basically. Someone drags your clubs for you.
Do you know what? It's funny, like, if you look at a lot of top level sportsmen in this country, whether it's footballers, whether it's cricketers, their second hobby, their second sport, they all play golf. Everyone who isn't a golfer but quite sporty, they all go and play golf. And I think that question comes up a lot. And I think for the reason you just said there, everyone picks golfers. You get to play all around the world. There's no danger of hurting yourself. So, yeah, I definitely think, do you know, Alex, maybe that's something you could take up, maybe when you're not on the airwaves. You can go down to your local club, you can get some golf lessons, and who knows, maybe me and you can play around of golf one day together. That'd be quite nice.
I want you to train me up, Sam. I'm going to be useless at it, but it's a really good way to chew the ear of various American presidents as well. You get a lot of power if you play golf. It's honestly, I'm beginning to have my head turned by it, if I'm going to be honest with you. Now, a sport that I've got no interest with and does have a serious risk of maiming and injury apparently is football, because the footage of Awoniyi, I think is how you say it.
Alex?
I have seen it. I mean, I can't say his name properly, but blimmin' heck, he's sort of sliding into sort of, I don't know, try and stop a goal being scored or score a goal. I'm not sure which role he was playing, but he just sort of buckles himself around the goal post. And that's where I've seen the footage end. But apparently this guy played on for a while, didn't he? Then he was put in an induced coma.
Yeah, it's all been really messy. He was woken from the induced coma yesterday, which is good news, after surgery to repair a serious abdominal injury. And yeah, for those who haven't seen it, it's pretty gruesome, isn't it? He tries to score a goal when he ends up colliding into a post, and then it was a little bit messy afterwards because he somehow ended up playing on. Nottingham Forest then made their final substitution, which wasn't him. The owner then comes charging onto the pitch to kind of have a heated discussion with the manager. So yeah, it was all a little bit confusing. So I think firstly, what's most important is that he's woken from the induced coma on yesterday after that surgery. I don't want to go really niche, Alex, but just bear with me here. There's been basically the person that put in the cross for him was offside, but because we have VAR in this country, the linesmen can't raise their flags. They have to wait for the game to play on to see what would have happened, then raise their flag. So now it's sort of lots of people are sort of saying, that rule needs to be changed because you play on and then an instant like that could happen. So it's all a little bit messy, but thankfully Awoniyi is going to be okay, Alex.
So basically, because I don't understand football, I vaguely understand the offside rule and I know what VAR stands for, but basically, should it not be a better system that the linesman still is the sort of first point of call and has his little flags and does his semaphore, and then if things want to be checked, they go to VAR? Would that be a better way of doing it?
The problem with offside is if a linesman thinks there's an offside, Alex, and raises his flag and the game stops, if you then look at the replay and he ends up being onside, it's then a really strange situation where what you do is you just let the player go in and take the one-on-one. I think they are better off with offsides, letting play plan out, and then whatever happens, whether it's a goal or a miss, then you raise the flag. So I think that rule, whilst it's unfortunate what happened with Awoniyi, I think linesmen have to let the game play on and then raise their flag. I can see you staring at me thinking, this is supposed to be the fun bit where we don't talk politics.
It's all...
I'm boring you, not just with the offside rule, but with VAR and offside. I'm so sorry.
Do you know, no, you're not. I'm just very sort of, the tunnel visioned when it comes to sport. It's Formula One and a bit of rugby, and that's it. It ends there with me.
Well, last time I spoke, it was just Formula One, so now you like ruggers.
I'm from Gloucester. Of course I like rugby.
I could imagine you at Twickenham with the girls and gals having a couple of
No, King's Home in the shed, supporting the Cherry and White.
The best place in the world to watch sport, right?
That's right. That's what they all say. We are the best supporters in Gloucester. Oh, the loudest, that's for sure. And actually, one of the very few rugby clubs that still has proper terracing, where you stand up and sort of scream your lungs out, not sit there in a little plastic seat like a prissy boy. Forget that. We do it properly down my way.
Yeah, but we need to do an OB from Gloucester ahead of a big rugby game. That's what we need to do.
Yes, lad. I'm for that.
Make it happen.
You better have a stomach for cider. I'll put you through your paces. Now, that is the actual sport of Gloucester. How many pints of scrumpy you can down. Forget the rugby. Sam Ellard, thank you ever so much. It's always so great catching up with you. Even if you are explaining the offside rule and VAR, there'll be people out there who'll be, yeah, well, exactly, that's all. Anyway, taking a short break now. Don't go anywhere. I'm back after this.
Morning, Mike. As an Aussie, we've been talking this morning about a new theme park which is going to be built. The Universal Studios apparently going to build in Bedfordshire. We've been asking many of you to give us some ideas for theme parks. Alison in South Wales says in the new theme park at 5 p.m. every day they could have the Pip Parade. All the people driving their brand new Motability cars.
Instead of the water rapids, you can have a road you go down that's full of potholes in a car with bad suspension and flat tyres. I don't know why they're bothering building a theme park in this country. They're going right, no one will be able to afford to go to it anyway.
How about the Rachel Reeves ride, says Terry in Birmingham. You go round and round and vanish up your own deficit. It's the HS2 ride. It travels at high speed for 10 feet, where everyone gets off and into the replacement bus ride. Tickets are £50 if bought 5 months in advance, or £1,000 on the day.
There's a strong rumour going round that Rachel Reeves is going to have a kissing booth for this theme park. So what I do, mate, I shove a £5 in a pot and you can go in and fill your boots.
Thank you very much indeed, and very generous of you. One from G, who says fast-track entry to every ride for illegals, plus a free night stay in the park's hotel and free food. New theme park bumper cars will have to pay a congestion charge, and the funhouse isn't built yet, despite Angela Rayner's pledge to build houses. And what about Ghost Train doesn't move because the driver's on strike? Have a good day. This is brilliant for the theme park. How about grow your own cannabis farm? Yeah, that's a good one. An Ethiopian safari park narrated by Angela Rayner. Says Gary in Durham. How about that? This sums up the Labour Party to me. The one idea they have to improve growth for the economy is to basically have a bloody big fun fair. It's the type of idea primary school children would pitch, given 10 minutes to come up with something. Well, it turns out, Matt, in Royston, that it's not even their idea. But they're now trying to claim it's their idea, even though it was actually the Tories.
They have done brilliantly on breakfast, but you know on Drive you've done brilliantly as well. Downhill slide ride surrounded by ULEZ cameras so that people are fined on exit. Love it. You could have a Birmingham-themed whack the rat stall. If you whack the rat, you can have your bin emptied for free. On the Labour theme park, a house of mirrors where they're all boarded up because they can't bear to look themselves in the eye.
I've got a great one for you, mate.
This is for the is this for the Universal theme park run by Labour?
Moat right around the park.
Yeah.
With loads of dinghies. Call it the channel and say anyone who can break in, all is free.
Imagine a Scouser say you can break into a theme park for free.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there and welcome back to the show. Alex Phillips sitting in for Jeremy Kyle here on Drive. I'm with you for one more hour until 7 o'clock. The time has flown by. I do like this shift. It's really nice. I'll tell you what's nice. You get to have a lie-in. So, well, on sort of, you know, compared to doing breakfast. So you always feel like you're full of Weetabix, and then you get to finish at a social hour so you can go and have a beer afterwards. What's not to like? That Jeremy Kyle doesn't know how easy he's got it, frankly. You watch out, Jezza. You leave this seat unoccupied for long enough and you'll find you'll be hard to get me out of it again. Right now, we're going to have a big old exciting ding-dong. That's right, it is time for a political head-to-head, and I'm joined by two of my favourites in the business of political commentary, representing the right and points to... Blimey, Michael was had like a heart attack then. He's like, the what? Representing the right is Peter Barnes, the one and only Barnsley. Representing the left, Mike Buckley, who... Well, we just love Mike. He dares to come into the lion's pit of... well, we're not really supposed to be of a political persuasion, but you know when you're sort of...
Yeah, you want a vibe.
That's
true. Might be fair to say.
Yeah, but we love you, Mike. We love you. We adore you.
Well,
let's kick off with Albania, because what's going on here? Because, you know, the Albania plan has been sort of mooted for quite a long time. It seems to me Edi Rama, having just enjoyed re-election, the Albanian Prime Minister, has rather pulled the rug from under Keir Starmer's feet. Mike, what happened?
Well, actually, Edi Rama, the Albanian Prime Minister, he's done what he said he was always going to do. So he's got a returns agreement or a migration agreement with Italy, which is just across the other side of the sea. So it's very, very close to Albania. It's a few hours by sea to get people from, you know, one side to the other. So what he said, he's taken some asylum seekers or failed asylum seekers from Italy so that they can be held in Albania while Italy tries to return them to where they came from. I think that's what's happening there. But Edi Rama has always said he wants to do the deal with Italy. He doesn't want to do that deal with anybody else. And he said today, lots of other nations have asked me to do the same thing. I've said no to all of them. This is nothing against the UK. I've said no to everybody. So thank you for asking Keir Starmer, but I'm not going to do it.
But he's now got to go with his begging bowl to some of Albania's neighbours and say, please, please, can you step into the fold?
Yeah, nobody likes to be asked second to the dance, do they? And I think that might be Keir Starmer's biggest problem. It's also the fact that he went. It wasn't just that he asked, it's that he went. And he said said no rather bluntly to his face in the middle of the press conference. I was like, oh, God, that was not a pleasant moment for anybody involved. But I have to admit, like you said, this has been on the cards for some time, and the answer was already in the room. I'm still surprised that Keir Starmer decided to go down this route. But, you know, given the state of the migrant crisis, there's nothing else that he can do. But considering the fact that he scrapped the Rwanda plan pretty much on day one, which was a child's, you know, action as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, it was just a nightmare for him, but it's all of his own making as far as I'm concerned.
Did they have other things to talk about at this meeting, or were they just talking about this?
It seemed, from what I understand, it was mainly just this. I think, obviously, they'd do a couple of other bits as well. It'd be a lot of the coalition of the willing stuff, considering its mobilisation where Albania is strategically. But, you know, this was the main you know, meat of the meal. And
I mean, I suppose from Keir's perspective, he wants to show to people in the public, you know, the public, that he's doing something on this issue. So maybe that's why he went.
Maybe,
because otherwise,
I could see
done with a phone call.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Particularly when you know the answer is already going to be no.
Yeah.
You stop the press spectacle of it.
I suppose what he's doing is showing to people, look, I'm doing my best.
But what is so funny, what is so striking about going to somewhere like Albania and saying, hey, can you help us with, you know, deportations, is perhaps the first question should be, oh, Eddie, mate, congratulations on being PM once again. You do realise that 1 in 50 of you lot who have come to Britain are in prison. You know, can you perhaps stop sending criminals? Because we have a very interesting relationship with Albania when it comes to organised crime.
Yeah, like you said, there are 1 in 50 in the prison, foreign prison population, which I think is staggering. But yeah, you know, I think at one point it was the top nationality that was coming to the UK, and they were all coming, like, you know, on very unusual, shall we say, visa arrangements that are organised. But
I mean, I'm just going to step in and defend Albania and the Albanians. I lived in Albania.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I did for 2 years.
Well,
quite a long time ago.
What was your particular criminal offence that you used to do?
I wasn't there as a criminal.
What were you trafficking?
I mean, it's still quite a poor country. It was a very poor country then. I was there as an aid worker, and there are lovely people, and it's an amazing country. It's incredibly beautiful. So I will very happily say big up Albania. I loved living there for 2 years.
The beaches are apparently
supposed to be stunning.
The beaches are incredibly stunning. I mean, it's very beautiful. It's a lovely place to go on holiday. So don't feel bad about Albania, people. Obviously, some people who've come here from Albania have committed crime, and that's a really, really bad thing. Obviously, same as when a British person or anybody else commits a crime, and we'd all like to see that stop. But we do, of course, have a returns agreement in place with Albania now. So when people come to the UK, they're now automatically returned.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, when you look at countries, it's the more they get wealth and the more they democratise, that they actually start losing these criminal elements somewhat. And Albania's still some way to go. And, you know, like you said, it's very easy. You could talk about Brits and the Costa del Sol, you know, the Costa del Crime and all.
I don't think we make ourselves very popular on the Costa del Sol, partly because of our behaviour and probably partly because of some criminal activity.
But statistically, Albanian crime gangs have looked at Britain and gone, hey, oh, that's where we can do some good business. Same with Turkish crime gangs as well.
Yeah, particularly here in London, it's a pretty open secret that the Albanian gangs pretty much run most of the underground of London. You know, and it's stretched out into most of the UK. The way that it worked is they moved into the UK, and with such ferocity, and took out most of the other criminal gangs. And it's quite a rather expansive plan that they had. It was, in a way, quite impressive, but not, if you know what I mean.
There was a long time when the Conservatives were in power when they were just getting rid of police officers. You know, we lost 20,000 police officers over, you know, about a 10-year period. Under Boris Johnson, he did start bringing those numbers back up, and of course now we've got a government that is more committed, I think, to police and crime and judicial areas. So I think we'll now start to see those gangs.
Well, you know, that's if they're not policing tweets and rather out on the streets. That would be rather nice, wouldn't it?
I think you genuinely do see more police officers around.
Do you know what? It's an interesting one. I know last time you were in, Mike, we discussed this, but talking about policing tweets, there's the Lucy Connolly case. We're going to be doing this in the next section, actually, that she might now have her sentence reduced on appeal. I think, for me personally, I want to see this happen because, I mean, I know we had a big sort of a discussion about this and whether, because, you know, I just think it's dreadful that woman's in prison. But 32 months seems... the optics of it being 32 months compared to you're a sex offender, you can come out after
She's not a folk
third
hero.
of your term.
She sent a horrific tweet inciting violence against incredibly vulnerable people in the middle of a series of race riots. She is not a folk hero. She is a criminal. She is rightly in prison. Now, for how long she's in prison is not. It's not
I think that is the element
I
of the
am
debate.
not the person who makes the sentencing.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I can see the argument that 32 months is quite a long time. It is quite a long time. But I think it's very important that we make clear to people that her behaviour was entirely unacceptable.
Yeah, you can make that clear, but you don't have to lock a woman up for 32 months. This is the bit that I don't disagree with what you're saying, that the tweet was horrific. However, you're going to have to tell me what is the impact of that tweet, and did it make anybody go and do anything?
Yeah,
this is the one bit that no one has ever been able to make that.
Know.
Well,
There's
then I'm sorry, then you cannot justify the sentence. If you will never know, you can't justify locking somebody's away, taking away their liberties on a basis of we'll never know. I'm sorry, you just can't. You can't.
Of course you can. We have
on the
laws
basis
in this
of a
country.
tweet.
It's a hate crime, is what it is.
Oh, there we go.
And it's very good that we have laws in our country against hate crime. There's an argument to be had about the sentencing. I'm glad it's going to appeal, and if the sentence is reduced, then of course I will respect the decision of the judge. But I'm very, very glad that she was held to account and that she's in prison right now.
Let's now talk about, let's talk sticking with prison, but, you know, we learned the other day that come November, the male prison population that's it, it's full, there's no more cells left. And so we're now having the next wave of people being released early, and in the Times today it's suggesting that there could be early release for sexual offenders. Yeah. I mean, it's just... You kind of have to go, how have we got to this point? As a developed nation, we haven't built those prisons. I mean, you're going to point the finger at the previous government. Frankly, I think you have to at this point, because you don't build a prison in 2 weeks.
No, you don't.
So you have to point to 15 years of another, party in governance that failed to do this, failed to read the runes and say, we're going to be at capacity soon. People messaging in. This is what I didn't realise. How many prisons have been shut down and turned into like places where Judge Jules is spinning the decks and you can stay overnight and do break out of a prison. So
I suppose they have to stop using old ones because they're just not fit for purpose anymore.
This is a big problem. Is the ones that we've got now that are open are being held together with like gaffer tape. It's rather ridiculous, actually. The standards and the safety of these places is nowhere near up to any standards. And I think you're right that you have to lay the blame at the last government. I don't disagree with that. But what I would also say is, well, where was the Labour Party in those 14 years banging on about the need to build prisons? You know, a responsible opposition has to come forward with plans. The idea that Keir Starmer did not know that this was happening, laughable.
I mean, whether we were, I actually don't know the answer, but we do have a problem. I mean, we have, per capita, we've got by far the biggest prison population in Europe. It is staggering how many more people per capita are in prison in the UK as compared to anywhere else in Europe.
Why is that? Is that because we're locking up people who shouldn't be locked up? Lucy Connolly. Or is that because actually we just got more crime here?
I don't think it's because I don't think it's because we've got more crime. Maybe we do just rely on putting people away rather than trying to change them and fix them. And there are lots of other kinds of punishments, like community service. Like I was reading about the Sycamore Gap people the other day. Those two, very silly people, let's say. And there were people saying they shouldn't go to prison for doing something really dumb. They should be made to plant 2,000 trees each, which is backbreaking road. Then they'll learn something. There's an argument for that, and maybe there's an argument for Lisa Connolly being asked to do something other than stay in prison.
I'm really with you on this.
But we do have to bring the numbers down. But we've got to ask why we have this culture. But I think it's. I mean, the press supports it. You know, you get these headlines of like, oh, they're banged up for like X years, and we all think, yeah, good. But is it good?
Another side to this argument,
it's not good for them. It's costing us thousands.
Another side to the argument is that one thing the Conservatives love pulling, a lever of popularity, was we're going to make sentences longer constantly. When people are going, yes, that's right. If someone's done something heinous, they should. So those people who would have been released weren't, and then you end up with this cumulative effect of, oh no, we haven't got any prison cells.
You also have the problem that there was a report that actually says longer sentences that do nothing really to quell those numbers. And actually, to give the Labour Party some credit and to bash the Tories a bit, pulling a probation services under Cameron was absolutely catastrophic, and we're living through the consequences of it because we caught people up in the cycle of crime and gave them no way to break it. That was that's why it's so high. There is no we make it so difficult to live on the outside of prison when someone spent even a year, 2 years in there. You know, the kind of markers they have to hit are pretty much impossible, even for a normal person. Like normal.
No, you're right.
Yeah, and that is the gutting of those services is we're living in the consequences.
Yeah, we are. Cameron Park privatised probation. Yeah. Then they realised it wouldn't work and brought it all back in-house. In the meantime, of course, that was years of chaos.
Oh, the chaos is still playing out when you look at the prison guards right now. You know, they're all over the place when it's.
I mean, those are incredibly hard jobs that we're
I've got a question. I've got two questions. We're all agreeing now. This is like a Tupperware party rather than a political ding-dong. Listen, Mike just reaches for his mug and I say, here we go. Let's snuggly. A couple of questions. There's a couple of things I want to ask you. Chewing the cud on two things that have just sprung to mind. mind. One is a little Alex policy here. I've always thought, I'm a big believer in rehabilitation, and a hard thing that prisoners face is not having income, not having anywhere to go, not being able to, not having a CV. And I think we bring so many people over here to work in jobs that Brits should be able to do. I've never understood why, when people are nearing the end of their sentences and are going through that process of going back into society, why we don't say, do you want to go work on a farm? Why are we getting young men from Lithuania when we've got a prison population who could do those jobs? Would that work?
Which we don't do. We should help them into employment, which we don't do. And you would think, I mean, given the, as we've just been saying, the amount of time that people are in prison for, that's more than enough time. I mean, that would create jobs as well, because you would then have a cohort of people, admittedly paid for by the states, that money's got to come from somewhere, who are doing that job of connecting them with accommodation and connecting them with employment. But you think it wouldn't be possible? I mean, like Timpson, the shop, where you get a brilliant job.
I think we really need to change the. Yeah, we have to change the culture.
I love Timpsons.
We have to change the culture of hiring ex-convicts. We really do, and I think that is one of the big things that we need to focus on, is changing the perception of it, and then you can actually start to see some policy difference.
Timpson shouldn't be the exception that we all point to.
I mean,
it
that's
should be
the thing.
norm.
I mean, shout out to a brilliant charity I know called Tempers Novo, who do just this. They try and get prisoners into work, and the stories that you read, the testimonies of people who said, I wanted to turn my life around, now I've got this fulfilling employment, now I'm in this particular layer of work, and I've bought a house and I got kids. You can't get those success stories unless you give people the opportunity.
Whereas if you just tripped out the door, you know, we've all seen the movies where the door slams behind them, you know, and they just stood there with their back. I mean, if they've literally got nowhere to go, no income, no job.
The only place is to go back into the crime cycle to which they started.
Exactly.
That's the only way.
It's the only way they're going to get a roof over their head for some of them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
That is no way to treat these people.
You're basically setting them up for failure.
You are, completely.
And it's not fair.
It's not
really
fair on them, but it's not fair on society.
That's true.
Yeah.
I can't remember what my second question was now. I had a topic, it was a completely different thing.
One was great.
Yeah, I mean, this is just, what else can we find to agree on today? This is not supposed to be the
Brexit years. There's always something with Brexit.
I know. I know what it was. It's popped back in my head. We were talking about prison officers, and so a couple of things here that I want you guys to agree on, or not. So two things. First of all, should we be given prison officers things like tasers? Because it strikes me that, you know, some of them are dealing with the hardest crims going, you're really tough nuts, and they're going about, you know, from cell to cell with just like a shirt and trousers on. So that's my first question. Then the second one is, should we really have female prison officers in men's prison? Because the amount of stories coming on now with these OnlyFans wannabes with affairs with inmates, I'm like, that is madness. Mike, where do you stand on when it comes to giving...
I am no expert on prison safety within prisons, obviously, so I bear that in mind with my comment, but when you're talking about giving tasers or any other weapon to prison staff, I just think, is it not really dangerous to be putting weaponry in a prison? Because I think you're putting the staff person in danger. Because I mean, what if 30 of them jump him because they want the taser, either because they want to do horrible things to other staff, or, you know, to prisoners rather, or because they want to try and, you know, stage an escape. I mean, this is kind of, I mean, I'm imagining a movie, obviously, but it could happen. I don't know how
good point.
They do keep the peace, but I would view that as a dangerous move rather than a sensible move.
For me, the thing is, I would start with maybe...
But I'm not an expert.
Yeah, I would start with body armour first, which is what the trade union has actually been asking, like, as a basic. They don't even have basic protective clothing, let alone tasers. I mean, let's start with something small and then maybe build up to a taser.
Like a stab vest.
Yeah, but this is the thing. If you look at the recent incident of the guy who had his throat slashed, that was done with an improvised weapon. So imagine what they can do with a taser. It's something that can actually
I mean, some of these
kill
people are not going to be very nice.
No,
right?
you
know, which is why they're in there. I mean, let's be fair. I mean, the biggest thing that's going to make a difference is the number of staff and are they well trained.
The training is the big aspect.
So then it brings me on to that second aspect, which is, I can't for the life of me understand why there are female prison officers in male prisons. This isn't about equal rights and women can do the job men do. You've got a load of men who have been deprived of, you know, satisfying their carnal urges for Lord knows how long, who have physical supremacy over a woman because they're men and they do. And then you've got a pretty young thing who's doing all this on Instagram, going from... I mean... that just to me is a recipe for disaster. And constantly now, there were statistics on it the other day, and I don't want to invent them, so I'm not going to, but basically it showed that during a particular year, the amount of female prison officers who were, you know, brought to justice for affairs with inmates was X amount. And it's gone up by a factor of a lot. I can't remember the numbers, but a lot. And I just think, at what point did we suddenly go, well, that's a good idea. Let's stick old, you know, Barbie
I mean, it seems
Jane
unwise.
in a...
I mean, I don't want to do down female prison officers, and I'm sure the vast majority do an incredible job.
Absolutely not.
But maybe they'd be better employed in female prisons. But again, I'm not an expert on the running of prisons, I to a degree, have to defer to the judgment of those that are.
The answer for that on me would be having incredibly high standards, and there be kind of no grey area. It's just, if you get caught doing this, you are out.
Yeah.
I think one of the big problems we've seen right across the public sector, no matter what department it is just the decline of standards and professionalism that we expect.
Because there's not enough accountability.
There's not enough accountability.
I mean,
when was the last?
That should be an immediate sacking offence.
But even even just the idea of just posing in your uniform on a picture on Instagram, for example, shouldn't be allowed. You know, there should be incredibly high standards.
It's unprofessional.
Yeah. And I go back to the accountability point, because when was the last time you saw anybody of any seniority in the public sector actually get fired? Not walk away from the job or they've been asked to leave. Actually fired. Because I genuinely can't. How most people in the Home Office still have a job is beyond my understanding, considering the crisis, the migrant crisis and this prisons. Why are there still people running around gainfully employed?
Yeah, both of you guys probably have a better understanding of the functions of Westminster than I do. I know a lot about politics, but, you know, the party that I was attached to didn't have MPs there until perhaps now. So I know a lot about the functioning of the European Parliament because I sat in it. But to what extent is it that actually Quangos, the civil service, that, you know, these people actually have a lot more power than politicians do? Because, you know, I was speaking to a Conservative who said, well, at the end of the day, a cabinet minister's a bit of a puppet. They just get their notes given to them by the civil service and sit around a table and read them out.
I think it's a lot more complicated than that.
Right.
I mean, I would imagine it depends on the cabinet minister. I mean, I do talk to MPs, former MPs, civil servants, who some of them say, you're talking about current indeed, or for more likely former ministers saying, you know, they didn't know what they're doing, they were just told to do what they were advised, etc. Whereas others are really, really good at their job and they're passionate about it and know exactly what they do, they're on a mission and they want to achieve it. And that's true on the Conservative side and it's true on the Labour side as well. I mean, you know, to be fair.
Do you think the Labour Party have the same? Because, you know, clearly with some Conservatives, they seem to have a lot of friction with the civil service and a bit of a struggle saying, well, look, they're not doing as we want them to do.
Yeah.
Do you think the Labour Party are facing the same challenges?
Yes. I think they are facing the same challenges. I think that the civil service went through a difficult time in much of the last administration. I mean, they didn't enjoy the Brexit years. I mean, who did, to be fair? I mean, you did, clearly.
I did. I think some of us are still drunk from 2016.
But I think, I mean, it's a massive administrative unit. It's a lot of people. And I think every new government coming in learns how to work with the civil service as it currently is.
The civil service.
Partly
politics on a platter.
No, exactly. Partly the people in it, and also just kind of the institution and how it functions. And Prime Minister after Prime Minister says the civil service is resistant to change. How true that is, I don't know, but I would imagine, given everybody says it, certain parts of it must be, and that makes their life more difficult. They think that makes their life difficult. I think from the civil service perspective, they would look at politicians saying, I want to do this, that and the other, and I think in some cases it's them thinking that's a really bad idea, I'm going to go really slowly so it doesn't happen because it's terrible. But it's also sometimes, I think, them probably just being wrong about that.
Well, being pragmatic and saying, look, we actually know the mechanisms, we know what can be afforded, we know what can be done, and this is just not workable.
But some of it is then they just roll their eyes and think, well, I've heard that one before.
Let's change the planning laws.
Have tried that, and it's never going to work, and it's just going to be costing money, so maybe don't do it. You know, but the cabinet minister would look at that as saying, well, them saying no or being obtuse or whatever. So
for me,
it's a mix of things.
My experience with the civil service is always, if you need something done in Whitehall, take a good book, because you will be there for a very long time. And the mentality of the civil service is always, we've got to kind of plan for every eventuality ever. And that's the civil service either covering its own back, or, in my opinion, it's actual proper policy making, because you have to cover every eventuality. Keir Starmer is now finding out that things don't move very quickly, but sometimes that's not a bad thing. You know, this is people's lives that we're dealing with. It's the nation. You know, we have to think.
You want checks and balances, not just sort of a gung-ho approach.
When it comes to cabinet ministers, again, the reason cabinet ministers and most politicians seem to move very cautiously is because one wrong foot a little bit becomes a Daily Mail or a Guardian headline. There is the consistent fear of making a mistake, and that mistake costing them their job, the party and all the rest of it. Because we don't live in a very forgiving society when it comes to politicians, that fear is now paralysing people, and because of that, things move even slower, and nobody wants the bold, radical change that I think this country needs, and it desperately needs, because all it takes is one wrong foot and the whole thing comes tumbling down. And I think we have to sometimes allow a government to actually implement what it wants.
Yeah,
and
do
push it
U-turns.
through.
I've always thought when people sort of attack U-turns, I think if a politicians put something in place and then go, actually, I got this wrong and this is better, what's so bad about that?
I would respect a government that did that.
Yeah. But this is
if something's not working, just
let it go.
But
if you're going in the direction,
HS2,
bye.
No, but the way to do it is always say, kind of take people on the journey that you went on. So the thing that Keir Starmer's got wrong with the Island of Strangers thing is he just kind of denied his previous opinions ever existed. The public aren't idiots. They say, well, wait a minute, you said that 10 minutes ago. If you explain, I read this, I spoke to this person, this has happened, people will be skeptical, but they'll give you the benefit of the doubt.
Like Muppets.
And the one thing every government needs is benefit of the doubt more than trust, because your politicians never going to believe you. But benefit of the doubt, you've at least got your foot in the door. And this is where Starmer's got the Island of Strangers things massively wrong from an optics perspective, because he's not got the benefit of the doubt. He's just looking like he's reacting to Nigel Farage, which we all know he is, but you could at least try and spin it a little better.
Oh, guys, well, that was just so lovely. So cheers to you all.
Great to see you. Nice to chat.
Let's do it. Political head-to-head.
Let's do it again.
Yeah, that was Tupperware time. Oh, thanks, guys. I feel all warm and fuzzy now and in the studio as well. Well, there you go. That was unexpected. Maybe refreshing and nice rather than yelling at each other and disagreeing. We just sort of all got along like a house on fire. We're going to take a short break now, and coming up after the break, I'm going to be speaking to Jill Levine, who's legal counsel at the Free Speech Union, about the appeal hearing in the Lucy Connolly case. That's coming up after this.
Claimed we lost a huge amount of public trust and confidence, and I'm the first person to acknowledge that, but we've got to win that back by being honest about the mistakes we made.
If you have to do a deal with a Nigel Farage reform to do that, to oust Labour, would you do it?
I want to put reform out of business. I want to send Nigel back to
And if you can't
retirement.
put reform out of business, which doesn't look likely right now, given they're ahead of you by quite a long way in the polls, would you do a deal?
No, look, Kemi's been very clear. No pacts, no coalitions.
Are you very clear?
Yeah, I've said for a very long time that my objective is to bring back, over time, the millions of voters that we lost at the last election.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Now, probably one of our most high-profile prisoners in the United Kingdom is a woman that arguably many people think shouldn't be in prison at all. And that is Lucy Connolly, who, of course, put out a tweet that she deleted 2 hours later, pretty much saying, and I'm going to sort of, give it in broad brushstrokes, but about migrants in hotels, burn the lot down, I don't care. Now, it's a very distasteful tweet, but some might say she was deliberately made an example of. There wasn't even, let's say, a proper court case, because there was, she was told to plead guilty. She did, and automatically got 32 months. But it meant she wasn't sat in front of a judge or magistrates or a jury to be able to defend the fact that, well, hold on, did this actually make people go out and riot? Where is the causality? Well, there is an appeal hearing today to see if her sentence can be reduced, and people think that if they're successful in this appeal hearing, she might even be released. Let's speak now to a woman who knows a thing or two about such cases, Jill Levine, who's legal counsel for the Free Speech Union. Jill, thanks for coming on the programme. I mean, what do you make of this Court of Appeal hearing? Do you think she's going to be successful?
Well, we really do hope that she is. We put a really strong legal team together for her, and the submissions that were made today were very carefully thought through by the judges, and so we remain hopeful. Unfortunately, we didn't get a verdict today. We have to wait whilst the judges sort of write up their decision, and they'll be providing that ruling in writing. We hope either tomorrow or possibly Monday, but we remain hopeful.
What are the main arguments during this hearing? Because there are people who are looking at, the politician in Runcorn, the former Labour politician, what was it, Mike Ainbury, who punched someone, actual assault and got a suspended sentence. And then Lucy, someone who's never been in trouble with the law at all, wrote something in a fit of passion, it was but words, deleted it 2 hours later, ends up in prison for 32 months. And there are a lot of people like me going, this is crazy. And she's not even been given visitation rights. And we know she's got a child, and we know she's got a sick husband. What sort of arguments are you making in this case to reduce that sentence?
Well, there's sort of two main lines of argument. One is that Lucy obviously pleaded guilty, and the case that was put forward to the court was that she admitted that she intended to incite serious violence, and her case is that's not what she ever conceded, and never wanted to put that concession to the court. So that's the first sort of limb of the argument. And the second is that under the sentencing guidelines, you're meant to sort of balance mitigating versus aggravating factors. And what we're saying in this case is that the balance wasn't struck correctly, and too little was placed on mitigating factors and too much on aggravating. And so it led to a skewed result where she got the most serious sentence that you can get, a Category 1A.
Do you think that if she hadn't been cajoled into pleading guilty, my understanding is the CPS said, look, just, you'll be far better off if you nod to all of this stuff, and there had actually been a court case where in some instances other people who were arrested at the time for similar offences did have a court case and ended up avoiding prison. Do you think if there had been a court case and the sort of burden of proof had to be on, well, you've got to prove that she actually wanted to incite a reaction, or you have to prove that what she wrote made people go out and then do X, Y and Z, that she would have even been in prison in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, it's always favourable to go in these sorts of cases with a jury trial. Unfortunately for Lucy, she was remanded into custody and denied bail, so she didn't have the opportunity to sort of go home, see her family, decompress, get advice in her own steam and confer, and then make a decision. In those situations, you're under a huge amount of pressure. For someone that's had no brush with the law before, it's extremely difficult to make a rational and calm decision, and that certainly would have played a part in the decision she took to plead guilty.
Do you know how she is bearing up in prison? Because I just think, a woman like, I don't know Lucy personally at all, but everything I've read about her makes me think that you couldn't find somebody less equipped to deal with a prison experience than Lucy, who was, looked after children, for crying out loud. There's nothing about her that makes me seem like she's a tough nut who would get on really well with other lags and not mind a stint. It seems quite the opposite. How's she doing?
Well, I haven't spoken to her directly, but I did have a brief chat with her husband at the court today, and he said that when she first entered prison, it was very petrifying, as it would be for anyone. In particular, certain people there regarded her as racist, etc., because of all of the negative publicity. But I think once they got to know her and they could see that sort of warm, caring side, she actually now is. She has lots of inmates wanting her number and wanting to keep in touch with her once she leaves prison. So I think that's a good indication that she's a good person and people like her.
Yeah, well, let's just hope that, I mean, look, I don't know her personally, but everything about this case to me stinks. I think it is wrong. I think she has made an example of quite deliberately, which I think is extremely cynical. I think the fact that she was denied visitation rights is absolutely abhorrent. And frankly, I hope for the best. Do keep us updated, Jill. We're going to potentially get a verdict on that appeal hearing maybe this week if we're lucky. If not, at the beginning of next week. And here on Talk, we will let you know how it all goes. Right, we're going to go to an advert break now, but another case that is really captivating the entire world is that of Mr. Sean Combs, aka P. Diddy, Puff Daddy, Puff, and all the horrific things that went on with those freakouts, whatever they're called. Oh my goodness, we're going to be getting all the detail on that after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello, welcome back to the show. Now, there is a huge trial going on in America at the moment. And those of us like me who were, teens in the 90s and the noughties, there was one big name in the world of rap music who outshone everybody else. A massive profile in R&B and hip-hop. It's so massive he got to change his name 1,000 times, which only big artists get to do. Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, Puffy, otherwise known as Sean Combs. And, well, he is currently facing the full force of the law over in America for all sorts of allegations: coercion, domestic violence, trafficking. Let's speak to LaDonna Harvey, who is from Arizona Morning News, and get the latest on what's going on. LaDonna, welcome to the programme. I mean, this is an absolutely astonishing case. Give us a breakdown on the sort of accusations he is facing.
So he is basically he's facing a lot of sex charges, but also on the federal level, racketeering charges. So, just to give you a little history, the RICO Act was meant to go after mobsters back in the day when alcohol was illegal, and it's been now spread out to be used in a whole lot of different legal ways. So RICO, racketeering charges, for him means that he was not just involved in these sex-fueled, druggy kind of parties, but that he coerced people, that he is involved in sex trafficking as well, in forcing women to do things that they didn't want to do. So the charges are extensive. Proving them is another thing entirely, and that's what the federal government has to do, explosive testimony that we've been hearing or not.
Yeah, I mean, some of that testimony has come from his ex, Cassie Ventura, who alleges there was decade-long abuse by her former partner, including physical violence and control. Some of the things she was describing in court are just astonishing.
Well, yeah, and the fact is that she can back some of that up. There's a hotel video of him grabbing her by her hair and jerking her into a hallway, kicking her several times. There are pictures of the aftermath of that. There are witnesses that say that he not just attacked her, but attacked other people, even people in his employ, sometimes in nightclubs. And what's interesting is, you know, you take a look at what his lawyers are saying. They're like, yeah, he's not a nice guy.
I mean, there were some people who were sort of comparing the sort of industrial scale of, you know, what was going on with these sort of freakout parties to the sort of allegations made against Jeffrey Epstein, Harvey Weinstein, that, you know, he was basically coercing women and men to engage in depraved acts against their will on a hugely sort of systemic level.
Right. And not just that, but filming them, using them for blackmail later so that he could keep ostensibly, I mean, you know, again, he hasn't been convicted of anything, but so that he could keep people under his thumb and make sure that they didn't go out and tell tales out of school, that they were able to be kept under control by him and by his attorneys, because he had all of this evidence saying, look at this gross stuff that I made you do that you did.
I mean, is this going to open a kind of Pandora's box? Because what we do know about, you know, Puff Daddy's infamous parties was how many other celebrities were there. Now, nobody's saying if Jay-Z was there or Justin Bieber that they were partaking in the stuff that might have gone on after hours, but there's potentially a lot of people with a lot to lose if more comes out.
Sure. And we heard the same thing, speaking of Epstein, about Jeffrey Epstein, and we still don't know what in the world happened. That dude's dead. You know, why don't we know everything? We should know all of the things. I think that it's going to come out in the testimony that there were celebrities who maybe were coerced as well. And he was so much more powerful. There was such a big power vacuum in this whole situation, as described by Cassie Ventura, that, you know, he was able to keep control of people because he could control their careers. He could keep them from making money. He could embarrass them horribly. He could ruin their lives. You know, the trade-off, I suppose, being that if you do what I say, then everything will be fine and you'll be rich and famous one day too. And for Cassie Ventura, that didn't happen.
Who are some of the people, the big names connected to all of this? Because off the top of my head, I know that, you know, Justin Bieber was sort of part of the manufacturing of a star under his wing of control. Same with Usher. J-Lo was his ex-girlfriend. Jay-Z, one of his best mates. I mean, these are massive international superstars.
They are. And, you know, at this point, I think the most interesting thing to find out is where did they fall on the scale? Where were they on the power scale? Were they power players in this? Did they know what was going on? And if they did, are they also going to get charged? There was a lot of talk prior to this that Justin Bieber may have been a victim, that Usher may have been a victim, that these are people who sort of depended on Diddy, Puff, whatever his name is, to, you know, kind of come up through the ranks, and that he basically frightened them into shutting up. You know, I don't know anybody else who has 1,000 bottles of baby oil in their house. That's right. It's a lot of oil, man.
That is a lot of oil. I mean, yeah, I mean, were they just dependent on his powers of patronage? Poor old Justin looks like he's unraveling at the seams. Usher seems to have sort of shrunk away from the limelight. Right. And, you know, it's astonishing because, like I said, that was the music of my era growing up. And I remember really loving a bit of R. Kelly as well. Blimmin' heck, you look at what he got up to with his harem of women being locked up against their will. And you have to ask yourself, is it time that the rap industry, the hip-hop industry, had its moment of reckoning? Because it seems to me a lot of really dark stuff, sexual coercion, trafficking, abuse, drugs, gangsterism, are all tied up in that industry, and no one's actually spoken about it until now.
Well, I mean, they rapped about it. So we've known about it for years. All women's called, you know, bitches and hoes, and pardon me, I hope I'm allowed to say that on the radio, but that's what was played on the radio in the United States. Women being degraded to a huge degree, and nobody's ever said anything. until now. It's like, well, what makes you think this is new?
Right, yeah. Why did everyone think it was just a bit of creative license when they were talking about that stuff? How far have we got to go? What are the next steps now in this massive, massive case? How long is it going to go on for? Do you reckon there's going to be some big revelations?
I think so. I mean, the first couple of days were shocking in and of themselves. You have this, heavily pregnant woman who's talking about some really degrading stuff that she says happened to her and that she didn't want it to. And I don't think she's going to be the only prosecution witness that they have saying the same things about him, that he has absolutely coerced more women and men. As far as how long it's going to last, this is a federal trial. I would guess probably longer than 2 weeks, maybe 3, just depending. And did he take the stand? That's the other question. He doesn't have to. He doesn't have to defend himself. The prosecution has to prove what it's trying to prove. And it may take its time, its own sweet time in doing it, because he doesn't look good anywhere. He doesn't look good.
It is an astonishing trial. I'm gripped by it. LaDonna, keep us updated from the other side of the pond, because my word, like I said, if you grew up in the sort of late 90s, early noughties, these are some of the biggest figures in music. And like LaDonna said, they were talking about this sort of stuff in their music, weren't they? And everyone just said, oh, well, creative license and, well, other reasons why perhaps that particular genre of music was not critiqued in the same way as perhaps it ought to have been. Fascinating stuff. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but when I come back, I'm going to read all of your messages and I'm going to take some calls, and then my former television husband, Mr. Kevin O'Sullivan, will be joining us for what we call in the industry a handover. That's coming up after this.
This is James Ask with Mike. He is the chief executive and founder.
Did you get a cupcake?
I didn't get a cupcake, James, but thank you.
Do you want a cupcake, Simon?
No, it's fine. I just want to know what happens next after this.
Who knows? We'll see. Look, everyone said we wouldn't get this far, right? Including yourself. So let's see. I think we've been pretty open, transparent with the journey, the difficulties, the problems, the challenges. So sometimes now we'll see what happens next.
If I were you, I wouldn't get on that plane. He doesn't sound like the sort of guy that should be running an airline. We'll see what happens tomorrow. I mean, what the hell's he talking about?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. Well, this is it. It's the dying embers of the show, and it's all about you, your calls, your messages. Let's do some messages first. Kaz in Bedford says, Alex, I thought I couldn't love you any more than I do. Thanks, Kaz. But I'm loving your tribute to your dad and lorry drivers. My son Simon has a university education, but decided to become a lorry driver and is currently a night driver for the Royal Mail. From what he tells me, it's an unbelievably hard job that deserves huge respect. They're monitored and scheduled within a second of their life. Don't I know it? They have to be fit enough to load up and be skilled enough to manoeuvre double-decker Arctics on all roads and conditions. It really is a superman's job. They spend many hours alone, but thanks to podcasts and talk, are often more clued up about current affairs than most. He worked flat out delivering food in the lockdown, and I'm very proud of him. I'm proud of him too. And you're right, if you want to know what's going on in the news, the best person to ask is a lorry driver. Great show, truck driver listening on the phone, driving through Germany on the way back to our green and pleasant land, England. Well, hello to you. Drive safely, at least on the old Autobahn. I don't know what restrictions are on lorries. You probably can't like blaze up the left-hand lane as it is in their fast lane at unlimited speeds. Hi, Alex. Love your work, says Joe in Norfolk. My hubby Pete is a lorry driver. Hello, Pete. Currently on the road. We are both avid Talk fans. We lost Pete's darling mum last week. Both heartbroken. Could you make him smile with a cheery hello? Pete, you are loved and you are appreciated. I'm really sorry to hear that you lost your mum last week. That's incredibly difficult, but we and the whole family at Talk are sending you our love and our prayers. And Roy from Gloucester, best city on earth, says, love your show. Just wanted to say the Gloucester services are definitely the best. There you are. Definitive proof right there. If Roy says so, it must be true. Okay, let's do some calls now and speak to Alex, who's in Edinburgh. Hi there, Alex.
Hi, how are you doing? It was just, I was watching one of your programmes about the prison problem with the population. And how the guards are having a hard time about it, getting sugar water thrown in their face.
Yeah.
And stabbed. Myself, I'm an ex-con, just back home a year and a couple of weeks.
Wow.
What it is, I just want to give you my take on it.
Please, fascinating.
Whether people agree with it or not, it's up in Scotland. I can only talk about Scotland. I feel it's like it's got a revolving door system. What I mean by that is you've got men that go into jail, they're released after a short period, a short sentence, for ridiculous things that they could be put on a sort of job.
Like community service stuff instead.
Yeah, but if they don't accept the help, right, nothing's going to change. You've got to, make sure they turn up. They've got all sorts of problems, mental health, drugs, drink, you name it. The government don't care. They genuinely, they talk a lot of talk, but they don't walk the walk. And the prison officers, on a daily basis, right, the tension in there, you can actually cut it with a knife. I know that's a terrible pun after talking about abuse.
Right.
But it's not all fun and roses for both sides. The prison officers used to, years ago, run the prison. There's too many people in the mix. Right down the line, it's, ran like I don't know, it's just a mess. The prison officers haven't got a total say.
Right.
We used to have POs, principal officers, SOs, senior officers, gallery officers. They were, quite a few of them were ex-service, and it was ran like in the army or the forces.
Yeah.
And prisoners knew where they stood. There was rules, right? Now, they're working. They're actually walking on eggshells because I'm trying to pick my words here because I don't want to get a chap at my door. They're walking on eggshells because they've got to be politically correct in everything they say or do, so they don't upset certain
Right.
People.
I get it. The cultural sensitivities, let us say. So you're basically saying that once upon a time, if you're a prison officer, you had the authority to do your job without fear or favour, whereas now there's so much sort of wokery and bureaucracy and hierarchy that prison officers are, you know, sort of scared to actually do their duties.
Very, very much so. The abuse I've witnessed on a daily basis, you just would not believe it. I'm picking my words carefully.
Yeah.
I could drop the F-bomb, so I'm not. The female officers on the wing that I was in were amazing, but I didn't agree with the female officers being on the wing.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, without being sort of crude about it, there's women being thrown into a lion's pit of men who don't really get to see women anymore.
Very much so. They've been attacked, and some of them have been tempted. I'm trying to be polite. Tempted to have a small liaison with, you know, a sexual, you know, encounter.
A sort of unauthorised conjugal visit.
Yes. We haven't only got in Scotland, we've got the nurses that come in, do an amazing job to the best of their ability. We've got the social works department, we've got the education department. Whereas it was really ran amazingly well years ago. The training was par excellence.
But it's all gone downhill.
Honest, I genuinely believe that the younger officers that want to make it a career, right, are not trained sufficiently.
And not equipped enough.
No, not equipped. I don't agree with giving them tasers. You know what I mean? That could be taken off them and it's flat.
But they need to be able to defend themselves. They need to have some protective equipment, maybe.
Stab vest. The extendable batons. It used to be the good old-fashioned wooden batons.
Right.
I had a taste of that in my younger days, but it didn't do me any harm.
Well, it's great, Alex. It's great to hear that you're out and about. You've, you know, picked up your life. You've, I hope, been rehabilitated. And thank you so much for having the courage to fall in and the candour to tell us what life is like on the inside. That was Alex in Edinburgh. Let's speak quickly to Nick in London. Hi, Nick.
Hello, Alex. I hope you're well. I don't think the government will actually reduce the net migration numbers because I don't think they actually want to. I don't think the MPs, Keir Starmer especially, made his a lifetime's work helping refugees come over and fight the immigration system and deportation system. I don't think it's in his personal DNA. I don't think it's in Labour MPs' DNA. It's certainly not in the DNA of the party's constituency.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there. But, you know, perhaps they've looked at the crisis we face because under the Conservative Party, immigration went off the rails. It went to exorbitant numbers. And any government must be thinking that's going to put social services, public services under a huge amount of strain. They can also see which way the wind is blowing. And if there's one thing that does motivate a politician, it's keeping their seat.
Yeah, I don't think they will. I think they see it too much as a social cause which they've lived off for too long and can't change our track. It's a bit like, I don't know, the deal Mrs May did, Theresa
May. Yeah. The sort of Brexit deal, because she clearly was a Remainer and probably you know, didn't ever want to leave the EU, and so tried to come out of this fudged half and half position, and it, well, didn't work, did it?
No, and I think that'll happen with anything Labour come up with on net migration, and it'll fail. And sadly.
Well, one might think if that fails, then so will the government, and we might be in for a political revolution in this country. We certainly are living in extremely interesting times. And, you know, Nick, I agree with you. I don't really think the Labour Party do want to cut immigration. It isn't in their political DNA. And even if they have had a Damascene conversion, have decided, actually, we do want to do this and we do believe in it and all the rest of it, it's going to be a hard blimmin' job getting members of the public to actually believe them when everything the Conservatives put in place, which which was almost nothing, they voted against and, used to call out, well, it's racist, you can't do that, it's divisive. That was Nick in London. Thank you ever so much. And someone's just sent a picture, and Simon the trucker has said, check this van out. I can't see what's on that van, but I can see that you've got a nice little pear in your cabin. The fruits, that is. Hello, Mr. O'Sullivan, my darling.
Alex.
How are you?
I'm very, very well.
All right, you've always got cool stuff in your programme. What you got lined up?